Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we descend into a world most of you wouldn't last a single afternoon in, let alone a whole day. That's right, we're strapping on our sandals, dodging chamber pots, and time-traveling straight into the mudded, brutal, and suspiciously damp heart of the Middle Ages. Imagine it, the year is 1324. The sun is barely peeking over the horizon, but the streets of your English village already stink like someone boiled cabbage and regret in the same pot overnight. The air is thick, clinging to your skin with the scent of animals, smoke, and something sour you can't quite place. That, dear listener, is what a normal Tuesday smells like. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I want to know where, and when, you're listening from, so drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins in a cold wooden shack with drafty beams and questionable insulation. You, an unlucky time traveler, are curled up under a blanket made from something once alive, possibly a sheep, possibly a cousin's sheep, with no idea how hard life is about to punch you in the teeth. Let's talk mornings. You're not waking up to a sunrise yoga class or a French press coffee. You're jolted awake by the sound of your neighbor's rooster crowing like it's possessed. There's no snooze button, only the smell of livestock, and the icy touch of dawn air cutting through the gaps in your wooden walls like a knife. There's no mattress. You're lying on straw, and not the golden, fairytale kind. It's the scratchy, bug-infested kind that's been airing out since last season. A rat scuttles across the floorboards, pauses briefly on your foot, and decides you're not interesting enough to nibble. Small win. You groggily sit up and are immediately hit with your first sensory assault of the day, body odor. Not just yours. Your entire family, and possibly the neighbor's goat, sleeps in the same room. Hygiene is optional and rare. Water is cold, soap is rare, and bathing is more of a community event held quarterly in the river. Historians still argue whether people bath more often than we think, or whether they just douse themselves in perfume in denial. You slip on your clothes, which is to say, the one outfit you own. A tunic made of rough wool, thick enough to block the wind, and itchy enough to make you question your will to live. Underneath, maybe a linen shirt, if you're fancy. Underwear? Not unless you're royalty or incredibly modern for your time. You cinch it all with a belt, which conveniently doubles as a tool hanger, coin pouch, and towel if needed. Multi-purpose fashion, medieval style. Let's talk footwear. Your shoes are leather, hand-stitched, and entirely flat, no arch support, no laces, just slabs of hide tied around your feet. Hope you like splinters and mud. Now comes breakfast. What's for breakfast? You ask, like someone who's forgotten where they are. There's no bacon sizzling, no eggs benedict, no oat milk latte. You get ale. Yes, ale. Because the water could kill you. Then comes stale bread, hard enough to knock someone unconscious, and maybe some cheese, assuming the mice didn't get to it first. If you're a peasant, and you are, that's the spread. You eat with your fingers because forks won't be commonly used for another few centuries. Spoons exist but are shared, and knives are personal, most people carry their own. No plates. Just wooden boards or trenchers, old bread bowls meant to soak up the grease. And because this is communal eating, you're sharing everything with your family, the dog, and whoever dropped by this morning to borrow your shovel again. Time to head out, but not before you open your front door and realize it doesn't actually lock. Privacy? Not a thing. Neither are house numbers, addresses, or consistent naming conventions. You're just John the Thatcher's boy, and everyone knows where you live by smell alone. Outside, the world is mud. Endless mud. Roads aren't paved. They're rutted tracks filled with rainwater, waste, and whatever the horses left behind. The concept of sidewalks is centuries away. You're navigating this swamp of sadness in thin shoes and a prayer. The town itself is a tangle of wooden houses, thatched roofs, and open-air markets. The buildings lean like they're whispering gossip to each other, and if one catches fire, the entire block's going with it. In fact, one fringe theory posits that urban fire was the unofficial town reset button. A bakery catches fire, and poof, new neighborhood. Speaking of fire, candles are your main light source. They are made from tallow, rendered animal fat. They smell, not great. But it's either that or you fumble in the dark, hoping you don't step on a chicken or worse, a neighbor. Let's say you work in the fields. Congratulations, you get to spend your day hunched over in the sun, breaking your back for someone else's grain. You're harvesting with a scythe that hasn't been sharpened since your grandfather's day, and your hands are already calloused from yesterday. Breaks are minimal. The church bell tells time, sort of, and you eat lunch wherever you drop from exhaustion. Maybe more bread, maybe some turnip soup. No seasoning, no variety, just pure, base nutrition. If you're lucky, you're not in the city. City life brings its own chaos. But even in rural villages, disease spreads like wildfire. You've got no idea why everyone's coughing, or why Jeffrey's skin turned purple yesterday. Could be the pox, could be the plague, could be Jeffrey being dramatic. A fringe belief of the time? Illness might come from miasma, bad air. So people carry pomanders, little scented balls filled with herbs and spices, which you wave under your nose like a medieval air freshener. Historians still debate whether these were more about superstition or just a desperate attempt not to pass out from the stench. Let's not forget about the livestock. Cows, pigs, chickens, all part of the household ecosystem. Chickens sleep inside. Pigs roam freely. At any given moment, you're probably stepping over at least 3 different species droppings. It's a miracle anyone lived past childhood. By midday, the sun is hot, your feet are soaked, and your neck is sunburned. You'd kill for a nap, but napping means you fall behind on the harvest. Fall behind, and you risk not having enough to eat during winter. Everything, your comfort, your health, your survival, hinges on relentless effort and prayer. And yet, you make it through the day, somehow. You drag yourself home, past the village well, where gossip flows faster than water, and back to your hut, where dinner is basically breakfast with less hope. Maybe someone caught a rabbit. Maybe you've got some leftover porridge. Either way, your stomach's still growling, and dessert is a concept you've never heard of. You crawl into bed, which again is just straw in a wooden frame. The fire's gone out. The wind seeps in. And as you pull your blanket up to your chin, you hear a scream outside. Probably just another pig fight. Or maybe someone got caught stealing an onion again. You try to sleep, surrounded by snoring, coughing, and the constant creak of a roof threatening to collapse. And you think, just for a moment, about warm showers, clean sheets, pizza delivery, and Wi-Fi. Then a flea bites your ankle, and you're back in 1324. The rooster's back. Or maybe it never left. Either way, it screams again at dawn, like a furious feathered alarm clock with no off switch. You stir under your thin, scratchy blanket, sore from yesterday's labors and dreaming, just for a second, that this might be the day things get better. But spoiler alert, it's not. Because this morning, like every morning, begins with that most noble of medieval rituals, breakfast. Now, lower your expectations. Lower them again. There we go. The very idea of breakfast as we know it, pancakes, fruit bowls, maybe a cheeky croissant, is laughable here. Food is fuel, and fuel is scarce. If you're a peasant, which, let's be honest, you are, your morning meal is less about indulgence and more about surviving until dusk. Today's breakfast spread? A small crust of rye bread, so tough you consider using it as a weapon instead of eating it. Maybe some weak ale to wash it down, since water from the nearby stream is a bacterial rave. And if you're very fortunate, or the village cat isn't, you might scrape together a bit of congealed milk or soft cheese, stored in a wooden bowl that still smells like last month's onions. The bread, for the record, is dark, gritty, and full of surprises. Not raisins, rocks. Grinding grain between stone mills often leaves little flecks of grit in the flour. Over time, these wear down your teeth like nature's own dental plan. Historians have found skulls with teeth so ground down, they resemble eroded stones. So yes, your molars are dying for the cause. Literally. You look down at your chunk of bread, give it a resigned sniff, and bite in. It's dry, crumbly, and vaguely sour, thanks to natural fermentation. Sourdough, but not the trendy kind. It tastes like regret. There's no butter. Butter is precious. If your family owns a cow, and again, that's a big if, you're using every last drop for cooking, trade, or just making it through winter. Instead, maybe you get a smear of dripping, leftover animal fat saved from last night's feast. It glistens. It's unsettling. It's breakfast. And don't even think about eggs. Chickens in the Middle Ages were mostly kept for meat. Eggs are luxury items, hoarded or traded, and if you happen to find one under the straw, you're lucky. Or doomed, it might have been sitting there for days. No best by dates in the 14th century. Some households grow pottage-worthy greens like leeks or onions, but those are reserved for stews, not breakfast. And forget fruit. Most peasants don't have access to orchards, and fruit doesn't keep well unless it's dried, which again costs time, space, and foresight. 3 things peasants famously do not have in abundance. Now, you might be wondering about porridge. Good question. Oats or barley boiled with water are a common morning meal, if you have them. It's lumpy, bland, and sticks to your ribs. And your bowl. And your hands. But it's warm, and in this world, warmth is currency. Children eat first. Not because it's polite, but because their survival is critical to the family's labor force. You don't make it to adulthood unless you've got stamina and luck, and the family's already lost 2 siblings to coughing fits and a poorly aimed cart. Every calorie counts. As you chew your morning bread boulder and sip your ale, you listen to the sounds of the household. Someone's wheezing again, the goat's making a scene, and a baby is crying like it already understands how bad things are. Comforting, isn't it? The meal ends quickly, there's no lingering. No family banter or what's on the agenda today, chatter. Everyone already knows. It's the same as yesterday, and the day before. Work, work, survive, don't die, work some more. No one's asking for your 5-year plan. They're just hoping you live long enough to see the harvest. Cleanup is minimal. You wipe your hands on your tunic, throw the crumbs to the dog, or pig, or toddler, and shuffle toward the door. There's no sink, no dishes, just wooden bowls and spoons that get rinsed once a week if you're lucky. Soap is for rich people and witches. Outside, the village begins to stir. Smoke drifts lazily from thatched roofs. Chickens squawk as they are herded out into the daylight. A barefoot child toddles past, completely unsupervised and covered in something that looks like porridge, but might not be. You nod a silent greeting to the smith's apprentice, whose hands are already blackened from the forge. You pass the baker's oven, where communal loaves are being cooked for those who brought their dough early enough to claim a spot. Baking at home is rare, ovens are expensive and dangerous. Villages rely on communal hearths or public bakers, who sometimes charge in bread instead of coin. A fun little tidbit? Bakers sometimes added chalk or powdered bone to stretch their flour. It gave bread a pale, fine texture that looked more refined, and incidentally made it taste like sadness and calcium. Some medieval city councils had to outlaw these tricks. Still, it happened. A lot. Speaking of laws, don't think too hard about them. Laws are vague, inconsistent, and heavily influenced by who you know or how much bread you can bribe someone with. Remember, your morning bread could double as currency or courtroom leverage. Versatility. As you walk past the market stalls, the smells shift. Spices, if you're lucky enough to be near a trade route, mingle with rotting fish and donkey sweat. Traders shout their wares, and animals outnumber humans 2 to 1. Someone's goat has climbed onto a cabbage cart again. No one is surprised. And then, you spot the Holy Grail, a traveling peddler selling honey cakes. Tiny, sweet, and absurdly expensive. A single bite's worth costs more than your tunic. You stare longingly, stomach growling, and wonder if you could trade something for it. Your belt, your shoes, maybe a sibling. But no. You walk on. Because deep down, you know that honey cake wouldn't last 5 seconds in your house. Not with 4 other mouths to feed and a suspiciously greedy-looking dog. You sigh, adjust your belt, and head toward the fields. Wait, before we go further, let's touch on what separates you from nobility. Aside from everything. While you gnaw bark like bread and dream of honey cakes, the local lord is enjoying a different kind of breakfast. Roasted quail eggs, fresh white bread, sifted flour, no rocks. Goat cheese drizzled with imported honey, and maybe even a dab of jam made from currants. His drinking wine. For breakfast. Because he can. Servants bring him steaming bowls of gruel, sweetened with spices from the east, cinnamon, nutmeg, even saffron. These are the rarest luxuries in the land, arriving via trade routes that span continents. The average peasant may never even smell these spices. The lord sneezes them away. But even nobles have their culinary limits. Ever heard of lamprey pie? It's a favorite among the elite, made from blood-sucking eels baked in a pastry crust. Delicious? Debatable. Fringe scholars argue whether these eels were delicacies or displays of power, because nothing says I'm rich like eating something you had to drown in wine before cooking. Back to you. By late morning, your stomach is already growling again, your teeth are aching, and you've got blisters on your palms from carrying firewood or working the soil. Your breakfast did little more than remind your body that it needed more. There's no second breakfast. You're not a hobbit. If you're lucky, someone might bring you a chunk of barley bread wrapped in cloth for the midday meal. But most likely, you work through lunch, or nibble on whatever roots you find growing near the field's edge. You wonder briefly how people survived. The answer? They didn't. Not for long. Malnutrition was common, and famine loomed every few years like an unwelcome guest. One bad harvest could doom a village. Children grew up stunted. Adults lost teeth by 30. The average peasant ate 2,000 calories a day, barely enough for their labor-intensive lives, and most of it came from bread and gruel. And yet, there's something almost poetic about their endurance. They took scraps and made stews. They baked coarse bread in shared ovens. They fermented everything: cabbage, fish, milk, life. Meals were communal, humble, and deeply rooted in tradition. Recipes were passed down by word of mouth and guesswork. A pinch of this, a ladle of that, and a prayer to Saint Honoratus, patron saint of bakers. By evening, the day's labors are winding down. Your stomach, which has spent the day alternating between outrage and despair, gets another round of peasant cuisine, stew made from root vegetables and maybe a bone or two for flavor. There's no meat. Just the memory of it, infused into the broth like an old friend who moved away. You eat with your family, hunched around the hearth, sipping from a shared bowl. It's hot, hearty, and vaguely smoky. Not because of some culinary technique, but because the chimney's half-blocked again. The smoke curls around your head as you chew slowly, savoring the only warmth you'll get all day. And as you finish your meal, bread, again, this time slightly less stale, you lean back, full in the way only desperate hunger allows. You've survived another day, and that's more than many can say. But as the fire crackles and the wind howls outside, one thing is certain: medieval breakfast was never the most important meal of the day. It was just the first in a long, exhausting list of challenges. And you, time traveler, are still standing. Barely. You survived another night. Barely. But now it's time to face one of the cruelest forms of medieval punishment: getting dressed. The rooster's back to its usual banshee routine, and the first light of day spills through the warped wooden slats in the wall, piercing the smoky haze still lingering from last night's fire. Your muscles groan in protest. Your straw mattress feels like a porcupine in a past life. But none of that matters because duty calls, and by duty, we mean frostbitten fingers and flea-riddled garments. Let's start with what's hanging on the peg near your door. You own maybe one or two complete outfits. That's it. No walk-in closet, no weather-appropriate jackets, and certainly no laundry cycle. Washing clothes involves hauling water from the stream, boiling it over an open fire, scrubbing garments with lye soap that stings your skin, and then drying them for half a week. So, you wear your outfit until it becomes part of you, smells, stains, and all. This morning, you slip on your trusty tunic. It's coarse wool, dyed a dull brown or gray with whatever natural dye your region can offer, maybe madder root for a faded red, maybe woad for blue if you're lucky. If you're a woman, your ensemble includes a chemise, a loose linen undergarment, and a kirtle, a long, belted dress. And over that? An apron. Not because you're baking cookies, but because you don't want your only dress ruined by goat drool and mud splatter. For men, it's the tunic again, belted at the waist, with hose, think medieval leggings, that sag in all the wrong places. These are often tied to a girdle or laced into your braids, baggy linen shorts, creating a delightful maze of knots and discomfort that somehow counts as everyday wear. Elastic doesn't exist, so you're adjusting your hose every 5 minutes unless you're fine with them puddling around your ankles like deflated balloons. Let's talk about shoes. Medieval footwear is, how do we say this delicately? A disaster. Most people wear turn shoes, thin leather stitched inside out and then flipped. They're about as durable as a wet paper bag and offer roughly the same arch support. Soles are flat, traction is non-existent, and puddles are personal enemies. But you wear them anyway because bare feet mean frostbite, tetanus, and the occasional goat bite. For the upper class, fashion is about displaying status. They wear brighter colors, tighter fits, and longer sleeves, sometimes so long that the fabric drags in the dirt behind them. Historians still argue whether these impractical flourishes were fashion statements or just excellent ways to collect local bacteria. Probably both. But for you, practicality is key. Layered linen if it's summer, thicker wool if it's winter, and a cloak when things get unbearable. Not the swooping, majestic cloak of fantasy movies, more like a heavy, damp rectangle fastened with a brooch or string. It keeps the wind out and traps every scent you've absorbed in the past month. Oh, and fleas. Don't forget the fleas. The Middle Ages are basically a golden age for parasites. Lice live in your seams. Fleas nest in your mattress. Ticks drop from trees like morbid confetti. You've got bites in places you can't scratch without scandal. There's a reason why the phrase nitpicking comes from literally picking lice eggs out of hair. Grooming isn't just a cosmetic concern, it's pest control. Combs, by the way, are made from wood or bone and look like tiny rakes. If you're lucky, someone in your village makes them. If not, you're plucking nits by hand and flicking them into the fire like tiny demons. Baths help, But they are rare, and even when you do bathe, the water is shared, family style. That's right. One tub. One family. One very muddy mess. Now, you glance in your polished copper mirror, more of a suggestion of a reflection than anything else, and do what counts as getting ready. You pull your hair back with a scrap of twine. There's no toothbrush, but you chew on twigs or use ash to scrape your teeth. Mouthwash? Ale. Perfume? A sprig of rosemary pinned to your tunic, if you're fancy. Otherwise, your natural scent does the talking. And if you're preparing for a festival or church feast, congratulations, you get to wear your best clothes. Which usually just means they're slightly less hole-ridden than your daily attire. If you're a woman, maybe you add a headscarf or wimple. Married women must cover their hair, unmarried girls wear theirs loose. Veils aren't just fashionable, they're moral indicators. Show too much hair, and suddenly you're the village scandal. Now, let's take a moment for the absurd, sumptuary laws. These are actual laws that tell you what you can and cannot wear based on your social class. Imagine being fined for wearing a fur collar or for using scarlet dye because you're not a noble. These laws exist to prevent people from looking richer than they are. Because in the Middle Ages, clothes don't just make the man, they legally define him. Shoemakers, weavers, and tailors are craftsmen with very specific roles. If you want a tunic, you visit the weaver for fabric, the dyer for color, the tailor for fit, and maybe the embroiderer if you're trying to impress someone, or bribe a church official. But for the average person? You inherit clothes, mend them endlessly, and when they finally give out, repurpose them as rags, bandages, or even baby diapers. You finally step outside, now dressed for the day, and immediately regret every decision. Rain, sleet, sun, there's no such thing as weather-appropriate gear. Umbrellas don't exist yet. Waterproof cloaks? Only for the wealthy. So you pull your hood over your head and trudge onward, dodging puddles, pigs, and steaming piles of something best not examined. For special events like weddings or feast days, clothing gets an upgrade. Bright colors, bells, embroidery, and exotic furs are trotted out, usually by those trying to show off. And the styles? Wildly varied. In 14th century Burgundy, men's tunics got so short that chroniclers complained about buttocks seen as plainly as if naked. Modesty was optional, but criticism was not. As for armor, no, you don't get to wear any. That's reserved for knights, mercenaries, or the occasional noble playing war. Male shirts are heavy, hot, and hideously expensive. Plate armor is a later invention and far rarer than Hollywood suggests. Most soldiers wore padded jackets called gambesons, basically quilted coats that offered protection and soaked up every drop of sweat you could produce. Let's not forget the smell. Every layer of fabric traps odors like a medieval sponge. Your cloak reeks of wood smoke. Your tunic is stained from yesterday's stew. Your underclothes, if you have them, haven't been changed in a week. And somehow, you're still expected to show up to church looking like a wholesome God-fearing soul. And yet, amidst all this discomfort, clothing is deeply symbolic. It's how people know your trade, your faith, your marital status, and even your place in society. Nuns wear black. Monks wear brown. Nobles flaunt fur and gold thread. Peasants wear brown. Again. Always brown. Historians still debate whether medieval people cared how they looked, but the evidence suggests they did. People embroidered hems. They patched with intention. They dyed with care. And even among peasants, a clean, well-maintained tunic was a source of pride. Clothes may not have been fashionable by today's standards, but they were meaningful, layered with cultural and personal identity. As you finish adjusting your belt for the 10th time, a breeze slices through your layers like a knife through barley dough. You pull your cloak tighter. Your fingers are already numb. And the sky above promises more rain. It always does. You glance back toward the hut. The fire's still smoldering, and you can see the silhouette of your grandmother trying to brush a chicken off the table. But you can't stay inside. Not today. You've got work to do, taxes to avoid, and 3 hours of walking ahead just to reach the distant sheep pasture. So you step forward, wool chafing, feet aching, cloak dragging in the mud. This is the medieval dress code: discomfort, durability, and a dash of despair. And yes, you look absolutely terrible. Out the door and into the wild, muddy mess of medieval public life you go. No time to pause, no time to rethink your decisions. The sky is a dismal gray, the wind is aggressively curious, and your cloak flaps behind you like it's trying to escape the day ahead. And why wouldn't it? Because today, you have to walk through a medieval town. And you, poor soul, are vastly underprepared. There's a reason you wouldn't last a day in this era, And it's not just the lice or the famine, it's the streets. Literally. The streets themselves might be the most dangerous part of your day. Not because of crime, though we'll get there, but because these narrow, winding pathways are a nightmarish obstacle course designed by someone who clearly hated pedestrians. Let's start with the basics: roads. The streets of a typical medieval village or town are not paved. They're not even leveled. They're dirt paths at best, sludgy trenches at worst. Cobblestones exist, yes, but only in wealthier towns or in the marketplace, and even then, they're uneven, slick with slime, and as comforting to your feet as a path of broken pottery. Mud is your constant companion. In spring, it's thick and hungry, grabbing at your shoes like it's trying to pull you into the earth. In winter, it freezes into jagged ridges that twist your ankles with glee. In summer, it dries into cracked channels that collect everything from horse dung to spilled ale. Oh yes, because everything goes into the street. Everything. Which brings us to the chamber pot. There are no flush toilets. There are no indoor plumbing systems. There is just you, a ceramic pot, and the unfortunate fact that human waste must go somewhere. So, where does it go? Why, out the window, of course. Usually with a helpful cry of Gardez-vous. An Anglo-French shout that roughly translates to watch out below. But sometimes, you get no warning. Just the wet slap of medieval reality. You quickly learn to walk close to the buildings. It's marginally safer. But not always. Because people throw more than just waste from their windows. Dishwater, spoiled milk, rotting vegetables. If it's liquid and unpleasant, it's headed your way. And if you're unlucky enough to be beneath a slanted thatched roof during a downpour, you'll enjoy a fresh waterfall of centuries-old bird droppings and roof runoff. Now, don't be mistaken, some towns have rudimentary drainage systems. Stone gutters line the middle of the road, encouraging filth to flow away from homes. But that only helps if there's consistent water to carry things along. Otherwise, the gunk just accumulates. It settles. It simmers. And in the summer heat? It ferments into a smell so potent it could strip paint. If paint had been invented yet. You gag. Again. Because even though you've been here a few days, your modern nose hasn't adjusted. No amount of rosemary sprigs tucked into your belt will shield you from the pungent medley of manure, sweat, wet fur, decomposing fish, and mystery sauce that coats the streets like medieval cologne. And then there's the noise. Think medieval towns are quiet? Think again. You're bombarded from all sides. A blacksmith hammering horseshoes in his forge, pigs squealing underfoot, hawkers shouting about cabbages or eels, church bells tolling at irregular intervals, and somewhere, always, a dog barking like its soul is on fire. A cart rumbles past, wheels groaning under the weight of barrels filled with what might be ale or might be something far less pleasant. The driver yells at a mule that has decided the middle of the street is the perfect spot to take a nap. No one is surprised. Animals are everywhere. Chickens dart between legs, pecking at crumbs. Cats lounge in doorways, eyes narrowed. Dogs scavenge freely, some mangy, some suspiciously well-fed. And pigs? Pigs are the ultimate street menace. They roam with chaotic energy, rooting through refuse and sometimes nipping at unsuspecting toddlers. One theory suggests that some pigs became semi-feral, so emboldened by urban life that they had to be controlled by royal decree. Yes, there were actual laws to manage pork-related crime. And don't even get started on horses. They're huge. They're grumpy. They poop with impunity. And their riders rarely look where they're going. You flatten yourself against a wall as a courier gallops past, his cloak flying, his expression grim. Letters from the castle? Or maybe just urgent news about a grain shortage. Either way, you nearly lose your toes. You clutch your cloak tighter and press onward, narrowly avoiding a child chasing a runaway hoop and a woman sloshing a suspiciously red bucket toward the gutter. Your boots squish. You don't want to know what's inside them. Let's not forget the market square. Ah yes, the heart of town life, a glorious mess of stalls, noise, smells, and elbow-to-elbow bodies. Here you can buy bread, cheese, eels, cloth, dried herbs, live chickens, pottery, shoes, and even bootleg religious relics. Ever wanted to own a fragment of St. Cuthbert's shinbone? There's a guy for that. The baker yells about his fresh rye. The fishmonger, unfortunately downwind, slaps his wares on a table with gusto. A traveling performer juggles knives while balancing on a barrel, and someone's already taken bets on whether he'll fall. He does. But beware, pickpockets love the market. You may not have much, but they'll take what little you do carry, usually tied to your belt in a cloth pouch. And if you confront one, don't expect justice. The town watch is selective. If you're poor, the best you'll get is a shrug and maybe a boot in the ribs. Speaking of the town watch, this isn't your neighborhood patrol with body cams and training seminars. These are men with cudgels and questionable hygiene who answer to the local lord or mayor. Their job is more about maintaining order than enforcing law. If you're disturbing the peace, you're in trouble. If someone rich accuses you of something, also trouble. But if you get robbed in broad daylight by a pig dressed as a monk, you're on your own. You duck into a narrow alley for a moment of peace and instantly regret it. It smells like a urinal crossed with old fish. Rats scatter as you step over broken crates. You glance up and see laundry flapping overhead on lines stretched between upper floors. One shirt has a bloodstain. You don't ask. Now let's pause for a moment to appreciate one of the era's greatest architectural quirks, jetted houses. These are buildings where the upper floors jet out over the street below, like they're leaning in for gossip. It makes the alleys feel narrower, darker, and somehow more menacing. But they're efficient. More space upstairs, less land taxed. Clever, and creepy. You return to the main road just in time to see a small parade go past. It's not a celebration, though, it's a public shaming. A thief, perhaps, or an adulterer, being led through the streets with a wooden sign around their neck and a jeering crowd following behind. Some towns use stocks. Others use pillories. Either way, public humiliation is a crowd pleaser. And then, clang, 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 the church bells sound again. Time for midday prayers. Everyone pauses. Merchants cross themselves. Workers wipe their hands and mumble rushed Ave Marias. Even the town drunk looks vaguely solemn for 10 seconds. You pretend to join in, mostly because being seen not praying is a fast track to suspicion. Now, here's a fringe fact to chew on. Some historians believe medieval cities were cleaner than we assume, at least by the standards of the time. Archaeological digs have revealed organized waste pits and even public latrines in some places. But these were the exception, not the rule. And even the best-kept town couldn't compete with modern sanitation. And that brings us to an open scholarly debate. Were medieval towns truly filthy cesspools, or is our image skewed by biased accounts and Victorian snobbery? Some argue that the Middle Ages weren't as backward as popular myth suggests. Others point to plague outbreaks, infant mortality rates, and the raw smell of everything and go, nah, they were gross. The jury's still out. You, however, don't need a jury. You just stepped into something that squelched and steamed. By late afternoon, you're tired, filthy, and slightly traumatized. You've dodged droppings, tripped over children, and accidentally made eye contact with a street performer singing a deeply unsettling ballad about miller's daughters and ghost cows. You need rest. You need water. You need, let's be honest, a shower, a therapist, and a tetanus shot. But none of those things exist. So you do what everyone else does. You find a bench, a barrel, or a cleanish bit of stone, sit down, and exhale. Around you, life churns on, grimy, loud, relentless. This is the street-level experience of medieval life. There's no buffer zone. No personal bubble. No clean getaway. Just the push and pull of daily survival, played out on roads designed more for horses and haphazard buckets than for your poor, exhausted feet. And as the sun starts to lower and the shadows lengthen, you know one thing for certain. Tomorrow, you have to do it all again. Dusk descends in streaks of amber and soot, slanting through the narrow streets and casting long shadows behind the milling townsfolk. The air thickens, not with the sweet hush of evening calm, but with smoke, sweat, and the distant bleat of overworked livestock. And you? You're still standing. But now comes the part you've dreaded since dawn, a full medieval workday. Forget your modern 8-hour shifts, ergonomic chairs, and air-conditioned cubicles. In medieval times, work-life balance means dying at 40 instead of 35. If you're a peasant, and you are, the term occupation isn't really up for discussion. Your job is whatever needs doing, and most of that is exhausting. You don't apply for it. You're born into it, stuck with it, and possibly buried by it, depending on how many accidents your tools cause this week. Let's start with the farmer, the backbone of feudal society. If you're lucky enough to have a tiny plot of land, and by lucky, we mean not indentured to some lord who claims half your harvest, your days are an endless blur of digging, planting, reaping, and hoping to all the saints that nothing dies before harvest. Fields are plowed by oxen, slow, stubborn beasts with minds of their own, and the plow is a heavy wooden contraption with iron tips that groans through soil like a hangover through your soul. You walk behind it all day, sometimes barefoot, sometimes shin-deep in mud, while a partner, your brother, your cousin, your very resentful spouse, coaxes the oxen forward with a stick in sheer rage. You sweat, you slip, you swear silently. And you do it all over again tomorrow. Even children work. There's no school unless you're noble or destined for the clergy. Instead, kids gather kindling, haul water, weed gardens, scare off crows, or run errands. By age 7, they're miniature adults in scratchy clothes, contributing to the family's survival with grim little faces and dirt-streaked hands. Childhood as a protected phase of life? Historians still argue whether it truly existed at all. Then there's the thatcher. That's you, on alternate days, if you're nimble and willing to climb. Your job is to repair rooftops using bundles of straw tied together in tight layers. It's hot work in summer, icy in winter, and always performed with the vague knowledge that one bad tumble turns you into street jam. But hey, if you do it well, your neighbors won't be soaked during the next downpour. If you don't, they'll talk. Loudly. Or maybe you're apprenticed to a blacksmith, which means your day is a festival of burns, soot, and tinnitus. You hammer horseshoes until your arms go numb. You pump bellows, polish blades, and dodge the occasional flying spark that lands directly in your hair. The forge roars like a dragon. The air tastes like pennies. And if your master is in a mood, you might be pulling double duty repairing pitchforks and reinforcing the miller's broken axle, again. And let's not forget the tanner. This is perhaps the single worst job in town, unless you're into skinning animals and soaking hides in urine. Yes, actual urine. It helps break down the fibers in the skin. So you spend your day standing ankle-deep in slop, massaging raw hides while flies treat you like a banquet. The stench follows you home, clings to your clothes, and ensures you never get invited to parties, if there were any to begin with. Still sound fun? Let's up the stakes. Because if you work within the town, you're subject to the ever-shifting laws of the guilds. Guilds are medieval labor unions with rules stricter than a monastery's. If you're a cobbler, you make only shoes. If you're a carpenter, you do not make chairs with more than 3 legs unless it's a feast day and Mercury is in retrograde. Exaggeration? Barely. Breaking guild rules could get you fined, exiled, or banned from your trade entirely. And if you're a woman, your choices are even more limited. Most are relegated to domestic labor, baking, brewing ale, spinning wool, weaving, caring for children, your own and others. Some assist midwives, others nurse the sick, and many work in markets. But a few become full-fledged business owners, particularly widows who inherit their husband's trade. That's right, sometimes the only path to independence is, well, being alone. Empowering? In a bleak kind of way. You might think clergy have it easy, cloistered monks copying manuscripts by candlelight, sipping wine, and humming Latin hymns. And sure, some do. But others till monastery gardens, tend sheep, or run infirmaries where they clean wounds with vinegar and prayer. Even the devout can't escape labor. Now, let's discuss the work schedule. It's not 9 to 5. It's more like sunrise to sunset. You're governed by the bells of the local church or abbey, which chime out the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. These mark prayer times, but also break up the day. You don't need a watch. You just need ears and a vague understanding of when to stop digging before collapsing. Lunch? Maybe a chunk of bread and onion, eaten while standing. Breaks? Only if it rains hard enough to flood the fields. Days off? Sundays are for church, not rest. Feast days offer more reprieve, and depending on the year and your region, you might get 40 to 60 of those. But that just means you work twice as hard the day before. Now, let's get into the tools. There's no power drill, no diesel tractor, no industrial mixer. Everything is manual. Axes, scythes, hammers, sickles, tools that haven't changed in centuries. Some are so rudimentary, it's a wonder they function at all. A farmer's hoe might just be a curved stick. A butcher's cleaver? A wedge of iron with a handle. You sharpen your blades with whetstones and hope they last another week. And accidents happen. All the time. There are no safety protocols. No goggles, no gloves, no steel-toed boots. If a blade slips, you bleed. If a beam falls, you break. If your ox kicks you, good luck explaining that limp for the next 40 years. You get one body. And if you mess it up, there's no workers' comp. Just a priest and some willow bark tea. In fact, medicine is so intertwined with work that many injuries are treated with herbs and superstition. Break a finger? Tie it to a stick. Crack a rib? Don't breathe too hard. Get an infected cut? Hope someone knows about garlic poultices. Historians debate whether herbalists had a surprisingly strong knowledge of plant-based remedies, or whether they were mostly guessing. Probably both. But even if you survive the tasks, there's the mental grind. Because your life revolves around labor, and your labor revolves around survival. You're not making art. You're not writing books. You're not chasing dreams. You're trying to feed your family, pay your tithes, appease your lord, and not die of exhaustion. Let's take a brief detour to the manor estate, where the local noble lives in a fortified stone house surrounded by farmland he doesn't till. His workday? Overseeing serfs, collecting taxes, maybe inspecting the wine cellar. He rides a horse instead of plowing behind one. And if he gets a splinter? The court physician is on hand with exotic ointments from Italy. This stark contrast isn't lost on you. Even now, trudging back from the field with a backache and a handful of turnips, you glance at the manor and wonder what it's like to own the land instead of kneeling on it. But you don't wonder too long. Because you're late returning home, and dinner doesn't cook itself. The hearth fire is sputtering when you arrive. You throw on more peat, stir the pottage, and collapse onto a bench with a groan. Your hands are blistered. Your legs ache. Your stomach growls. And still, you have chores, fetching water, feeding animals, mending tools. Rest is a luxury. Leisure is a myth. Your spouse tends to the younger children while the older ones chase down a goose that wandered into the neighbor's garden. Someone's crying. Someone's laughing. Someone's shouting about a rat in the flour. Just another weekday. The food is bland but warm, turnips, onions, maybe a scrap of pork if the pig cooperated this week. You eat in silence, interrupted only by slurping and the occasional tale of someone falling in the well again. As darkness settles, work continues inside. You spin wool by lamplight, patch clothing, carve wooden spoons, or prepare tools for tomorrow. And when your eyes blur and your hands cramp, you finally lay down on straw, surrounded by snores and creaking timbers. The fire's out. The wind creeps in. Your muscles twitch from overuse. And you know, without doubt, that you'll wake up and do it all again. Because in the Middle Ages, work isn't something you do. It's something you are. It starts with a toothache. A dull, throbbing pulse behind your molars that blooms into a full-scale migraine by dawn. You try ignoring it, there's work to do, after all, but by the time you're stumbling home from the fields, one side of your face is swollen, your vision is blurring, and every heartbeat thuds straight through your gums like a tiny, vengeful drummer. Welcome to medieval medicine, where science is still in its experimental stage. Most cures are borrowed from superstition, and your best chance at healing might involve something sharp and a bucket to scream into. You try home remedies first. Everyone knows someone who's good with herbs, and your village's wise woman, a leathery old figure named Agnes with a voice like cracked bark, pulls you aside with a knowing squint. She stuffs a pungent mix of garlic, mint, and sage into your mouth and tells you to bite down hard. The taste is horrific. Your eyes water. She nods approvingly. If it burns, it's working. Unfortunately, it's not. So you stagger to the barber surgeon. Yes, you heard that right. In the Middle Ages, barbers don't just cut hair, they also pull teeth, bleed patients, lance boils, and perform low-risk surgeries with the same tools they use to trim beards. That cheerful striped barber pole? It's actually a stylized nod to blood and bandages. Comforting, right? You enter the dingy shop with its wooden chair and smell of iron and old fear. The barber surgeon greets you with a blood-stained apron and a grin missing 3 teeth of his own. Ah, another candidate for extraction, he says, flexing fingers that have clearly never known soap. You sit. He examines your mouth with a soot-blackened spoon and a splintery stick. Ah yes, he mutters. Rotten to the root. We'll need the forceps. The forceps are rusty. The chair has no straps. There's no anesthetic, unless you count the cup of ale he offers you to steady the nerves. You gulp it and brace yourself as he jams the iron tool into your mouth and yanks. Pain, white-hot and blinding, bursts through your skull. You scream, buck, and then suddenly, it's out. The tooth. The pain's still there, but different. Duller. You're sweating. Crying. Bleeding. But alive. See? Easy, he chirps, tossing the tooth into a jar of others, like a grim collection of trophies. He wraps your jaw with a cloth soaked in vinegar and hands you a scrap of advice: sleep on your left side. Keeps the humors balanced. Ah, yes. The 4 humors. A cornerstone of medieval medical theory. Doctors, real ones, trained at universities in Paris or Bologna, believe that the human body is governed by 4 fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Health, they say, is a matter of keeping these in perfect balance. Too much blood? You're feverish and aggressive. Too much black bile? You're melancholic. Phlegm? You're sluggish. Yellow bile? Congratulations, you're angry and likely to vomit. So how do they restore balance? With treatments like bloodletting, using leeches, blades, or cupping to release excess blood. Popular and deadly. Purging, drinking laxatives or emetics to flush your system. Often results in severe dehydration. Cauterization, burning wounds shut with hot iron. Less infection, more agony. Trepanation, drilling holes into your skull to release bad spirits. Still debated whether it helped or just didn't kill you immediately. Let's say you suffer from headaches, fevers, or just general bad humors. The town physician might prescribe you a boiled mixture of crushed snails, wine, and rue. If you're wealthy, maybe it's spiced with cinnamon or saffron, because apparently flavor helps with suffering. And if that doesn't work? Time to visit a monastery. Monks serve as the intellectual lifeline of medieval Europe. In addition to copying manuscripts and praying 7 times a day, they tend infirmaries stocked with herbs grown in cloistered gardens. These aren't your average backyard plants. Monks cultivate everything from valerian, for anxiety, to comfrey, for bone healing, and hyssop, for respiratory issues. You're placed on a straw mattress in the corner of the abbey infirmary. A monk gently offers you warm ale infused with poppy seeds and honey. You sip. He lays cool cloths on your forehead. He prays. He sings. It's oddly calming. But you're not the only patient. To your left lies a man with open sores on his legs, possibly ergotism, a result of eating moldy rye. To your right, a child burns with fever. Across the room, someone coughs so violently, they nearly fall from the cot. Tuberculosis? Maybe. No one's sure. Here's the thing, medieval people understand illness exists, but not really why. Germ theory won't arrive until the 19th century. In the meantime, diseases are blamed on everything from bad air, miasma, to divine punishment, unbalanced humors, or being cursed by a neighbor with a suspicious mole. Still, some treatments work. Not always because of the intention behind them, but because herbal remedies do contain natural antibiotics or anti-inflammatories. Willow bark, for instance, contains salicin, similar to modern aspirin. Garlic fights bacteria. Honey is antimicrobial. Even leeches can promote circulation. So maybe you're not completely doomed. Unless you get the plague. Ah yes. The bubonic plague, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, it wipes out somewhere between a third to half of Europe's population. Caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread by fleas living on rats, the plague brings fever, vomiting, and swollen buboes, blackened lumps in the armpits and groin. If you're unlucky enough to get it, and most people are, your options are limited. Prayer. Fleeing, which spreads it. Being quarantined, literally locked in your house with your infected family. Bleeding, purging, or being wrapped in crushed emerald paste. None of these work. Doctors wear long cloaks and beaked masks stuffed with herbs to filter bad air. These plague masks become iconic. They do not help. But they look terrifying, which seems to be part of the treatment. And here's a kicker, many people believe the plague is punishment for sin. So they march through towns whipping themselves in public penance, flagellants, they're called, bleeding in the streets, begging for mercy. It's horrifying. It spreads disease. The church eventually bans them. Not that it helps much. But maybe you avoid the plague. Lucky you. That still leaves a buffet of other ailments. St. Anthony's fire, caused by eating moldy grains, leads to burning limbs and hallucinations. Scrofula, swollen neck glands, thought to be curable only by the king's touch. Leprosy, a slow, disfiguring disease. Sufferers are exiled to leper colonies. Bells are hung around their necks so others hear them coming. Pellagra, niacin deficiency from too much corn, causing skin rashes and madness. Even pregnancy is life-threatening. There's no prenatal care. No antiseptic. No surgical options for breech births. Midwives rely on instinct, herbal brews, and fervent prayer. Infant mortality is high. So is maternal mortality. And should the mother survive, she's often left to recover while returning to chores within days. And yet, despite all this, people endure. Communities support each other. Healing is as much emotional as physical. Songs are sung. Folk charms are tied around wrists. Prayers echo through cottages and cathedrals alike. Not because they work, but because hope, even the fragile kind, is a powerful medicine. But still, if you had a time machine, this is the moment you'd try to go back. Even a 24-hour clinic waiting room filled with bad magazines and crying toddlers is better than having a hot iron applied to your boils by a man who sharpens razors with his apron. As night falls, your jaw is still tender from the extraction. The herbal paste helped, marginally. The swelling is down. But the fear remains. What happens next time? When the fever doesn't break? When the cough deepens? When the pain returns, sharper and deeper than before? You roll onto your straw mat, listening to the rustle of rats and the wheezing of your neighbor in the corner. Maybe tomorrow you'll feel better. Maybe not. But one thing is certain, in the Middle Ages, medicine may offer hope, but healing is mostly a miracle. There's a commotion outside the window. Shouts echo down the alley, with splinters under a heavy thud, and someone is definitely screaming. Again. You peek outside cautiously and see two men wrestling in the dirt, one with a bruised face and the other waving what looks like a broken chair leg. A small crowd watches, half entertained, half indifferent. The town watch, if they're even awake, are nowhere to be seen. And so begins the next chapter of your medieval experience. Law, order, and the kind of justice that makes you wish you'd taken up falconry instead of living among humans. Let's be clear, medieval justice is not a well-oiled machine. It's more like a goat-drawn cart with one missing wheel and an especially sarcastic passenger shouting directions from the back. Everything depends on who you are, who you know, and who's willing to swear that you didn't do whatever it is they think you did. And if you did do it? Well, we hope you have strong ankles. In this world, getting arrested is terrifyingly easy. Maybe someone accuses you of theft. Maybe your cow wandered into a lord's field. Maybe you said something shady about the local priest's sermon and now there's talk of heresy. The crime can be real, petty, or entirely fabricated. The process is chaotic, and the outcome is rarely fair. You're hauled to the center of the village by two watchmen with breath that smells like turnips and regret. No one reads you your rights. You have none. You're not offered a lawyer. Legal representation is for nobility and clergy. You get a quick hearing, if you're lucky, in front of the local bailiff, reeve, or manorial court. Think of them as a mashup between judge, landlord, and town gossip. The hearing goes something like this. Someone points at you dramatically. A few witnesses step forward. One says they saw you lingering near the chicken coop. You swear innocence. The village priest frowns meaningfully. You're found guilty. The punishment? Depends on the offense, and the mood of your judge. Let's say it's theft. A common crime, especially when winter's been cruel and the food stores are low. If this is your first offense, you might be sentenced to the pillory, a wooden frame that clamps around your head and wrists, bolting you upright in the middle of town. There you stand, helpless, while townsfolk throw whatever they can find, spoiled fruit, mud, insults, or worse. It's public humiliation, social theater, and community entertainment all rolled into one itchy, humiliating experience. You squint as a tomato hits your temple and another person yells, "Thief!" despite the fact that you were mostly just borrowing that loaf of bread. But things can escalate. Steal again? You might lose a hand. Commit arson? Death. Blaspheme loudly in the town square during Mass? Stocks and a fine, or possibly a whipping if the local bishop is feeling righteous. There's a whole catalogue of creative medieval punishments. Some infamous, some overhyped. Branding, hot irons pressed into the flesh to mark you as a criminal. Whipping, delivered in the town square with a number of lashes determined by the crime and the judge's breakfast. Fines, popular with the wealthy, who can often buy their way out of trouble. Exile, you're banished from town, good luck surviving out there. Hanging, for serious crimes like murder, treason, or poaching from the king's forest. That last one, by the way, is disturbingly common. Royal forests are off limits. Even gathering fallen wood can earn you a place on the gallows if caught. The laws are strict, the punishments harsh, and the enforcers inconsistent. You're always one unlucky mistake away from dancing at the end of a rope. And if you happen to be accused of something and protest your innocence? Get ready for trial by ordeal. This is exactly what it sounds like. There are several varieties. Ordeal by fire, you carry a red-hot iron bar a certain distance. If your burns heal cleanly within a few days, God has judged you innocent. Ordeal by water, you're bound and thrown into a river. If you float, you're guilty, because water rejects sinners. If you sink, you're innocent, and also probably dead. Ordeal by combat, you fight your accuser or a chosen champion. The winner is assumed to be in the right. Brutal? Absolutely. But weirdly formal. And yes, there are cases where these were real. The church eventually discouraged such methods, but in many rural areas, they persisted out of tradition and fear of divine wrath. Historians still debate how often they were used versus how often they were threatened to encourage confessions. Then there's the issue of witchcraft. If you're a woman, especially one who's poor, widowed, opinionated, or lives slightly too far from town, congratulations, you're suspicious. People blame everything from bad crops to illness on witches. And once that suspicion takes root, it's nearly impossible to shake. A neighbor falls ill. A cow gives birth to a stillborn calf. A thunderstorm hits during harvest. Suddenly, you're being accused of consorting with demons because someone remembered that time you talked to a crow. The punishment? Trial, usually. The evidence? Gossip. A birthmark. A healing herb you used last week. You might be tested by being pricked with a needle to see if you bleed, witches supposedly don't. Or by being dunked in water, back to the ordeal by water again. If you survive, you're guilty. If you drown, you're not. Either way, grim. And even if you're not a criminal, you're still under constant scrutiny. The church keeps close tabs on behavior. Gossiping, drinking too much, missing mass, or being idle can all earn you public penance. Think of it as being cancelled, but with more cow dung and no chance to log off. Now imagine being noble. Oh yes, the laws are different for you. Nobles commit the same crimes, sometimes worse, but often face lesser penalties. A drunken noble who kills a peasant in a duel might pay a fine. A peasant who slaps a noble's horse might get flogged. Justice is not blind. She's just very into feudalism. Still, the nobility have their own form of punishment, politics. If you fall out of favor at court, you might be exiled, imprisoned in a cold stone keep, or poisoned with your morning stew. It's less public, more subtle, but no less deadly. Meanwhile, in cities, law enforcement is handled by guards, sheriffs, or elected officials known as bailiffs or constables. They walk beats, collect taxes, break up fights, and sometimes take bribes. Corruption is rampant, paperwork is non-existent, and your safety is always a matter of who you know. If you're extremely lucky, your town has a codified legal system like those developing in parts of Italy or France. But even there, trials are slow, prisons are brutal, and appeals? Hilarious. Speaking of prisons, don't imagine high-security complexes with cells and feeding schedules. Medieval jails are damp, rat-infested dungeons beneath castles or town halls. You're chained to the wall. There's no bedding. Food comes irregularly. Disease is rampant. And you're not there as punishment. You're there waiting, for trial, for ransom, or for death. Most punishments happen outside the jail. The jail is a holding pen. If you're poor and can't bribe your way out, you rot. If you're wealthy and accused of heresy, you rot slower, but fancier. And yes, heresy is a capital offense. Say the wrong thing about the Pope, deny a doctrine, or get caught reading the Bible in the vernacular and suddenly you're facing a very special version of trial, one run by the church itself. Welcome to the Inquisition. Torture is likely. Mercy is rare. You might confess just to stop the pain. Then you'll be sentenced anyway. But despite all this, justice isn't entirely bleak. In smaller communities, disputes are often settled through mediation. Local lords sometimes act as arbitrators. Fines, compensation, and apologies are common resolutions, especially when the community wants to maintain peace. There's also the concept of wergild, a compensation system where wrongdoers pay victims or their families. If you kill someone, you pay their kin. The amount depends on the victim's social status. It's not exactly fair, but it beats blood feuds and cyclical vengeance. As you lie in bed that night, nursing your still sore jaw and your bruised ego from being accused of looking suspiciously at someone's goat, you realize something chilling. You don't need to do something wrong to get punished here. You just need to be poor, unlucky, or disliked. Tomorrow, you'll keep your head down. You'll say your prayers, tend your garden, and try not to step on anyone's shadow. Because in medieval times, justice isn't blind. She's just squinting through smoke, swinging a club, and hoping she hits the right person. The sun dips behind the thatched rooftops, casting long spindly shadows that stretch like claws across the dirt road. The last warmth of the day fades, and with it goes your sense of safety. Because in medieval times, nightfall isn't rest, it's risk. You've survived another punishing stretch of daylight, the aching labor, the sour meals, the inevitable dodging of bodily fluids hurled from upper windows. But now, as darkness settles in and the village shutters its windows, the real danger creeps closer. The night is when everything the day hides begins to slither out, and medieval people know it. You latch the door with the only thing between you and whatever's out there, a wooden bar barely thicker than your wrist. You push the latch into place, wedge a stool under the handle for good measure, and sit back, watching the glow of the hearth shrink as the flames die down to embers. Firewood is too valuable to burn all night. You're lucky to have enough to make a meal and a warm spot to sit before the cold creeps in again. You listen. Not for something specific, but because that's what you do at night. Everyone does. You listen for footsteps. Rustling. A scream. The howl of a dog that might mean wolves or, depending on the local superstition, a bad omen. You try not to look at the window. It's covered with animal bladder stretched tight and oil to keep the wind out. Glass exists, but it's for the wealthy, and even then, it's too cloudy to see through. But what you can't see might see you. Because as much as this is a time of farming and faith, it's also an age of fear. Fear of thieves. Fear of fire. Fear of illness. But most of all, fear of the unknown. In the Middle Ages, the dark isn't just the absence of light. It's where evil lives. Let's start with the practical, crime. When the sun goes down, law enforcement becomes more or less non-existent. Watchmen in cities patrol with lanterns and cudgels, but they are more for show than safety. In towns and villages, there's usually a curfew bell. Once it rings, you're supposed to be indoors. Anyone caught outside is suspicious by default. What honest man walks after dark? They'd say, while squinting at your cloak and deciding whether you look like a criminal or a witch. Of course, many people do walk after dark. Bakers working early, midwives answering desperate knocks, messengers carrying news by moonlight. But that doesn't matter if you're mistaken for a thief and beaten before you can explain. In cities, danger is worse. Alleyways teem with cut purses and desperate souls who found the law less comforting than crime. Bandits sometimes lurk just beyond the city gates, targeting anyone foolish enough to travel at night. Even traveling merchants, those romanticized wanderers of storybooks, sleep with daggers in hand. And if you're caught outside after curfew, you might be forced to spend the night in the street, under an archway or beneath a cart. You'll sleep lightly, if at all, cradling your satchel, trying not to shiver too loudly, hoping no one decides to test how fast you bleed. Then there's fire. Nearly everything is made of wood. Houses. Roofs. Stalls. Even furniture. And when one catches fire, they all do. Chimneys are rudimentary. Candles are unstable. Open hearths crackle unattended. And people fall asleep beside them every night, exhausted from their labors. One wayward spark, and an entire street is reduced to ashes before dawn. There's no organized fire brigade. If flames start, people form a bucket line from the nearest well, assuming there's water and the well isn't frozen. You pass buckets until your arms fail, then throw mud on the flames. Sometimes, the only way to save part of a town is to tear down adjacent houses to stop the fire from spreading. You'd better believe that's your house if you live near the bakery. Some towns install night watches specifically to look out for fires. Their job? Listen for screaming, sniff for smoke, and ring bells when things go terribly wrong. But by the time they react, it's often too late. And after a fire, you're homeless, along with your family, your neighbors, your livestock, and possibly half the town. If you're thinking you'll just keep a fire burning inside your hut all night to stay warm, good luck. Unattended embers can escape onto the rushes that line your floor. Yes, that's right, your flooring is dry plant matter sprinkled with herbs to mask the stench. The herbs don't do much, and they're incredibly flammable. Sleep tight. But even worse than fire or thieves is what people imagine in the night. This is a world steeped in folklore. The line between religion and superstition is blurry at best, and monsters are real, if not in body, then certainly in belief. Villagers speak in hushed tones about night demons, werewolves, spirits of the damned, and witches who fly through the air on broomsticks or ride black goats through town squares. The woods beyond the village are said to be haunted, filled with fey creatures that kidnap children or trick travelers into walking in circles until they go mad. The wild hunt is feared across Europe, a spectral procession of ghostly riders that flies through the sky, collecting the souls of the wicked or unlucky. If you hear hoofbeats in the distance after midnight, don't look. Don't listen. Just pray. Historians still argue whether such stories were believed literally or told as moral tales. But in villages where literacy is low and death is high, these fears become as real as any sword or fire. Even educated people aren't immune. Monks write accounts of encountering demons in lonely corridors. Nobles speak of dreams so vivid they believe they were visited by the devil. One bishop claims he fought an incubus using only prayer and a sharp stick. The incubus did not provide comment. It's not just stories. The architecture itself reveals the fear. Medieval churches often have grotesque carvings, gargoyles, contorted beasts, demonic faces. Their purpose? To scare away evil spirits. Because if a demon sees something uglier than itself, it flees in terror. That's the theory, anyway. Your house may not have gargoyles, but it probably has charms. A sprig of rowan over the door. A horseshoe nailed upside down to trap luck. A doll made of straw buried near the hearth to protect from evil eyes. You didn't put them there, but your grandmother did. And you'd never remove them. Why risk it? And then, there are dreams. Nightmares are not just the brain's after-hours entertainment. In the Middle Ages, they are omens. Visitations. Warnings from the beyond. If you dream of wolves, someone is lying to you. If you dream of teeth falling out, someone in your family will die. If you dream of flying? That's suspicious. Better see the priest. You might be dabbling in things best left alone. Speaking of priests, if you're truly terrified, you can always request a blessing. Holy water is kept on hand. Crosses are hung. Latin prayers are muttered at bedsides. But the church is busy. There are sins to pardon, tithes to collect, and heretics to burn. Your night terrors may not make the top of the list. Even the way people sleep reflects their fears. Most peasants sleep in communal rooms, often with the animals. It's warmer that way, and safer. You're less likely to be robbed, or haunted, if surrounded by snoring relatives and a suspiciously noisy goat. And sleep isn't linear. Historians believe people often practiced segmented sleep, 2 periods of rest, broken by a stretch of wakefulness around midnight. During this time, people pray, tend fires, even visit neighbors. It's a quiet hour, shrouded in ritual, and filled with whispered stories that somehow always end with someone being carried off by a shadowy figure. Eventually, you drift off. Not because you're safe. But because your body gives up. Your mind surrenders. The straw rustles. Someone coughs. A dog barks once, sharply. Then silence. And in that stillness, you understand something medieval people have always known. The night does not belong to you. It belongs to everything you can't see. Morning returns with a yawn, a cough, and the distant sound of someone arguing with a pig. You survived another night without being robbed, burned out, or snatched by forest demons. Impressive. But as you stretch your aching limbs and try to ignore the flea bites tracing constellations along your shins, you remember another grim medieval reality, the love life. Spoiler alert, romance in the Middle Ages is less candlelit dinners and stolen glances, and more political negotiations, economic strategy, and occasional livestock exchange. Swipe right? More like swap goat. If you're a peasant, marriage isn't just encouraged, it's expected. But not for love. Not for companionship. Not for the sheer joy of waking up next to someone with trench foot and morning breath stronger than fermented turnips. No, marriage is practical. It's about survival, labor, and land. Mostly labor. 2 hands are good. 4 hands are better. Add in a couple of strapping offspring, and now you've got a workforce. Romantic love, as we imagine it, hearts, flowers, swooning under moonlight, is a luxury reserved for troubadours and nobles with too much time on their hands and an unhealthy interest in lute music. Among common folk, you marry who's available, within walking distance, and ideally not related. Though the rules on that last part were flexible. A local farmer has an eligible daughter? Perfect. He needs help with the fields, and your family needs another cow. Congratulations, you're engaged. There's no ring, no proposal on bended knee, and certainly no diamond. It hasn't even been marketed yet. Instead, it's a verbal agreement between families, possibly witnessed by neighbors and sealed with a handshake or, occasionally, a ceremonial mug of ale. Your wedding? It might happen in the churchyard, maybe even during Sunday Mass if the priest feels generous. There's no bridal registry, no bouquet toss. Just a hurried exchange of vows, a blessing from the priest, and then straight to work. You might not even get a full day off. As for the wedding night? Well, prepare for disappointment. For one thing, privacy is non-existent. The entire household shares the same sleeping quarters, parents, children, visiting uncles, chickens, so the newlyweds are lucky if they get a curtain or a blanket to hide behind. In some communities, witnesses even linger nearby to ensure the marriage is consummated. Romantic, right? Sex itself is viewed through a strange lens. It's natural, yes, but also dangerous, sinful, and morally ambiguous. The church keeps a very detailed list of what's acceptable, and it's a short list. No pleasure, no unnatural positions, and absolutely no laughter. If it feels good, you're probably doing it wrong. And forget birth control. It barely exists, unless you count dubious herbal brews, amulets, or whispering a charm during the act itself. Historians remain deeply skeptical about the effectiveness of magic rhymes. As a result, children arrive regularly, often one after another, and far too many don't survive infancy. Now let's say you're noble. Ah yes. Love gets even messier. Marriages among the elite are high-stakes affairs. Land, wealth, political alliances, these are the real heartthrobs of aristocratic matchmaking. Whether you like your spouse doesn't matter. What matters is how much land she brings with her, or whether her brother is about to inherit a conveniently unguarded castle. Arranged marriages are the norm. Betrothals can happen as early as infancy. You might be promised to someone you've never met, in a country you've never seen, based on a treaty your parents signed before you were out of diapers. And once you're married? That's it. Divorce isn't just rare, it's nearly impossible. Annulments exist, but they require scandal, political clout, or papal permission. So what do you do if you're stuck in a loveless marriage? You start writing poetry. This is the age of courtly love, a highly ritualized, often platonic, and sometimes not so platonic, affair between a nobleman and a woman who's usually not his wife. He writes sonnets. She drops handkerchiefs. They flirt in hallways and exchange glances at jousts. It's all very dramatic and very unconsummated, or so they claim. Troubadours spread these tales across Europe, noble knights pining for their ladies, swearing oaths beneath balconies, risking duels for a single favor. Historians still debate how widespread these practices actually were. Some argue they were exaggerated literary tropes. Others suggest nobles really were spending their nights reciting poetry in iambic pentameter while their wives slept in separate chambers. And what of women? In marriage, their lives are dictated by duty. Among peasants, wives share the burden of field work, child-rearing, and household chores. Among nobles, women are pawns in dynastic games, married off to secure alliances and expected to produce heirs, preferably male ones. But some women carve out autonomy. Widows, for example, often enjoy a surprising degree of freedom. With their husbands gone, they inherit land or businesses, manage households, and even remarry by choice. Others become midwives, alewives, or herbalists, jobs that offer a sliver of independence and occasional whispers of witchcraft. And then there are the exceptions. Stories float through taverns and market stalls about women who fall in love outside of marriage. About men who leave their betrothed for a milkmaid. About lovers who run away together, vanishing into the woods to start a new life. These tales usually end in tragedy or exile. Sometimes they inspire ballads. More often, they are used as warnings. Let's not forget the church. Celibacy is the gold standard, at least in theory. Monks and nuns take vows of chastity and devote themselves to God, living in cloisters and spending their days in prayer, reflection, and the occasional argument about manuscript margins. But not all clergy are models of purity. Some priests take mistresses. Bishops father children. Church records, when they are honest, reveal a surprisingly common problem: illegitimate clergy offspring. Reforms come and go, but human nature remains consistently disobedient. Speaking of disobedience, let's talk punishment. Sex outside marriage is a sin. Caught in the act? Expect public penance, a fine, or worse. Adultery? It depends on your gender. A married woman caught with another man might be paraded through town wearing nothing but her shift. A man caught with a noble's wife could be flogged, or killed. Homosexuality is punished severely, labeled a crime against nature. The church denounces it, and secular courts often follow suit. Punishments range from fines to imprisonment to death. Despite this, same-sex relationships did exist, coded, hidden, sometimes flourishing in private letters or whispered alliances. And let's not forget prostitution. Brothels are common in medieval towns, especially near ports, pilgrimage routes, and university towns. Looking at you, Oxford. The church condemns prostitution, but towns often regulate it. Why? Because it's seen as a necessary evil, a way to prevent worse sins like adultery or assault. In many cases, brothels are licensed, taxed, and surprisingly orderly. Just don't expect much in the way of protection, hygiene, or health. As for relationships between different social classes, those are walking scandals. A nobleman seducing a peasant girl? It happens. Often. Sometimes consensually, sometimes under threat. The girl might be shamed, married off quickly, or quietly removed. If a noblewoman is caught with a commoner, however, the consequences are much more severe. Class boundaries are sacred, and crossing them without permission is dangerous for everyone involved. Now imagine falling in love. Really, deeply, foolishly in love, with someone you're not supposed to. There's no dating. No privacy. Every interaction is watched, judged, whispered about. You exchange glances in the market. You pass notes in church. You invent excuses to visit the same well at the same time. It's thrilling. It's dangerous. It's probably doomed. Still, love finds a way. Some people do marry for love, quietly, fiercely, in defiance of expectation. Peasants sometimes choose their partners freely, especially in smaller communities. They laugh together, share bread, raise children, and grow old beneath a sagging thatch roof. Their romance isn't grand or poetic, but it's real. You may not have perfume or poetry, but you have shared glances, whispered jokes, calloused hands that reach for yours after a long day in the field. And somehow, that's enough. You wake up coughing. Again. Not the dry, one-and-done kind. This cough rattles your ribs and ends with a tightness in your chest that makes you feel like your lungs have been replaced with wet burlap. Your breath smells vaguely metallic. Someone next to you mutters something about bad air. You nod grimly. Because, yes, congratulations. You're sick. And in medieval times, sickness is not a detour. It's a way of life. Your neighbor down the lane died last week. The blacksmith's wife has been in bed for a month. And 3 kids in your village were buried yesterday under hastily carved wooden crosses. You don't know what they had. No one really does. The terms are vague: the sweat, the flux, the bloody cough, the fire in the gut. Diagnosis is a blend of superstition, observation, and sheer guesswork. Sometimes they name the illness after the season. Or the saint whose feast day it's near. Or just call it God's punishment. You sit up slowly, hacking into your sleeve, and realize something even more dreadful: you're not the only one. Your brother is curled up in the corner, shivering. The toddler is burning with fever. The goat sneezed 3 times this morning and no one's ruling anything out. The house is too small, too crowded, and too warm in all the wrong ways. Welcome to the age of disease. Let's begin with the obvious contender, the Black Death. It's the headline act, the superstar of the medieval pandemic circuit, and still one of the deadliest events in human history. Between 1347 and 1351, the bubonic plague swept across Europe, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people. That's up to 60% of the population in some areas. Imagine waking up one day to discover half your village is either dead or dying. Then imagine it happens again a few years later. And again. And again. But the Black Death isn't the only threat lurking in the shadows. The Middle Ages are a veritable smorgasbord of horrible diseases, each more charming than the last. Let's start with leprosy. It's not the biblical lightning bolt disease some stories suggest, but a slow, nerve-deadening, disfiguring illness now called Hansen's disease. Medieval lepers are feared and ostracized, not just for their symptoms, but because of the belief that they are morally corrupt. As a result, many are exiled to leper houses or forced to carry bells to warn others of their approach. You know, just in case the swollen joints and patchy skin weren't obvious. Then there's ergotism, known charmingly as St. Anthony's fire. Caused by eating rye contaminated with a nasty little fungus, this disease causes convulsions, hallucinations, and gangrene. Your fingers blacken, your limbs burn, and your mind starts to unravel. Some historians speculate that outbreaks of ergotism may have inspired early witchcraft panics, or, at the very least, made you believe your loaf of bread was whispering threats. Tuberculosis, or consumption, is another mainstay. It's not flashy, but it's relentless. You cough, you waste away, and everyone pretends not to notice the pinkish tint in your handkerchief. The disease moves slowly, often over years, giving it a grim dignity. Poets of later centuries will romanticize it. That's because they never had to live with someone coughing blood all over the soup pot. Smallpox is another killer. Less frequent than the plague but far more scarring, literally. Survivors often carry pitted scars across their faces, souvenirs of the fever, vomiting, and pustules that raged across their bodies. Those with strong immune systems survive. The rest are quietly buried. And of course, typhoid, dysentery, and cholera, all caused by contaminated water and poor sanitation, are ever-present threats. You think that slightly sour ale is bad? Wait until the latrine upstream overflows during spring thaw and someone brews stew with it. Entire monasteries have been wiped out by bad broth. But let's zoom in on that nasty cough of yours. It's been a few days. You're weaker now. Food tastes like metal. You tried that herbal poultice from the wise woman, 3 kinds of mold and a crushed beetle, but your fever's only worsened. The priest visits and anoints your forehead. You wonder if he's here for healing or last rites. He won't say. Everyone's talking about miasma, bad air. It's believed that foul smells cause disease, so people carry pomanders, tiny balls filled with cloves, herbs, and perfumes, and hang sweet-smelling flowers near beds. Sometimes, they burn aromatic woods or throw salt across thresholds. You hang garlic by the window, not because it works, but because doing nothing feels worse. And even when there's no epidemic sweeping through, your daily health is under siege. You eat mostly grains, rarely fruits, and even rarer still, fresh greens. Scurvy creeps up on you slowly, your gums swelling and teeth loosening. Rickets bows your legs in childhood from vitamin D deficiency. You don't understand the cause. No one does. Water? It's suspicious. Everyone knows the well has its moods. Ale and weak beer are safer, less alcohol, more boiled. Kids drink it too. Pregnant women? Same. It's not indulgent, it's survival. You think, maybe, you should get some rest. But you can't afford it. Your household depends on your labor. Sick or not, someone has to haul water, feed the animals, stoke the fire, and grind the grain. There's no such thing as calling in. There's only enduring. And if your illness becomes serious, something public? You might be quarantined. Yes, the idea of quarantine isn't new. During plague outbreaks, whole households are boarded up. Doors nailed shut. Food is slid through cracks or lowered in baskets. You live in a box with your sick family and wait to see who comes out alive. City walls sometimes close. Roads are blocked. Sailors are confined to ships for 40 days, a quarantina, which gives us the term. Towns burn pitch in the streets to cleanse the air. Churches hold processions. People whip themselves in penance, hoping their pain buys immunity. And sometimes, in their desperation, they look for scapegoats. Jews, foreigners, beggars, lepers, anyone different, are blamed for the disease. Pogroms erupt. Whole communities are destroyed in frenzies of violence, driven by fear and lies. It's not just disease that spreads fast, it's hate. Despite this, some healing does happen. Monasteries, with their herb gardens and quiet discipline, become centers of medical knowledge. Hospitals, rudimentary, yes, but revolutionary, emerge in cities. Some are founded by religious orders. Others by nobles seeking divine favor. They offer care, food, and shelter, though not always cure. And for all the superstition, some medieval remedies work. Honey dressings help wounds. Certain herbs reduce inflammation. Cold compresses lower fevers. The problem isn't ignorance, it's incomplete understanding. Medicine, like everything else here, is patchwork, part wisdom, part wishful thinking. Even the idea of quarantine, flawed as it is, shows a growing awareness that disease spreads. That it's not just bad air or divine wrath, but something passed from person to person. Still, your odds aren't great. Most people don't live past their 30s. Infants die in droves. Women face deadly risks with every childbirth. Soldiers return from campaigns limping, coughing, or riddled with something no one wants to name. Even the wealthy, swaddled in silks and guarded by walls, fall to fevers that no gold can cure. You curl under your blanket, shivering, while the wind whistles through the thatch above. The fire is low. Your family sleeps close, their breathing uneven. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls. Another death? Another hour? Who knows? Your heart beats heavily in your chest, a slow drum against the sickness. You're not dying yet. But you're close enough to see how easy it would be. You think of clean hospitals. Of sterile bandages. Of antibiotics, for fluids, and thermometers. But those belong to another world. One where fever isn't a death sentence. One where survival isn't a coin toss. For now, you sleep. Or try. And you dream of fresh air, not the miasma-laced fog of the village, but true, clean, silent air. The kind that doesn't burn your lungs when you breathe. The kind you'll never know in this century. The church bell tolls again, solemn, echoing, a sound that cuts through the smoky air and rattles your bones more than it soothes them. You sit up from your straw mat, stiff from fever, still weak, but not dead. Yet. So, by all rules of medieval society, it's time to get up. Because illness or not, you've got obligations. And the most unavoidable one? Church. In medieval Europe, faith isn't just part of life. It is life. It governs your calendar, your meals, your wardrobe, your fears, your future, and your final judgment. From birth to death, Religion wraps around you like wool, itchy, heavy, sometimes comforting, sometimes suffocating, but always present. You're born into it. Baptized before you can walk, marked with holy water to cleanse the original sin you inherited from Adam and Eve. You never agreed to it. You never questioned it. No one does, not openly, not without consequences. The church is your mother, your teacher, your local authority, and your all-seeing moral compass. Whether you're a peasant tilling rocky soil or a baron lounging in velvet, you answer to God, or at least to the men who claim to speak for him. Let's be clear, when we talk about the church, we mean the Catholic Church. The Reformation is still centuries away. There's one path, one set of sacraments, and one enormous institution stretching across all of Western Christendom. Popes crown kings. Bishops own land. Priests wield the power of heaven, and sometimes hell. And so, as the morning bell tolls, you prepare for Mass. You don't understand Latin. That's fine. You're not meant to. The services are sung, muttered, and murmured in a sacred tongue that sounds like poetry and feels like law. You kneel on cold stone. You cross yourself when others do. You bow your head when the priest raises the host, that thin wafer of bread that is, depending on theological nuance, either symbolic or literally transformed into the body of Christ. It doesn't matter that your back hurts or that your shoes are soaked. You are expected to attend. Every Sunday. Every feast day. Every holy day of obligation. And if you don't? Well, people notice. Your absence is noted. Your name might be whispered. The priest might visit. And if your neglect continues, you may be publicly rebuked, or worse, excommunicated. That's not just a spiritual slap on the wrist. That's social death. You can't marry, trade, be buried on holy ground, or receive the sacraments. You're a ghost among the living. So you go. Rain or shine. Fever or no fever. The inside of the church is damp, chilled even in summer. Candles flicker on the altar. Stained glass, if your village is lucky enough to afford it, casts colored light across the floor. You stare at saints with blank eyes, carved in wood or painted on the walls. Some are serene. Others are terrifying, wielding swords, spears, or holding their own severed heads. Religion here isn't all love and light. It's blood and judgment. It's Old Testament fury meets medieval theatricality. The devil is real. Hell is certain. And you're always one bad confession away from eternal fire. You listen to the sermon. You catch a few familiar words. Sin. Grace. Obedience. The priest's voice rises and falls like the tolling bell, heavy with certainty. He speaks of indulgences, of saints who suffered more than you, of the holiness of obedience. He reminds you that suffering now means reward later, maybe. You think about your swollen ankle, your raw hands, your half-full belly. Does this count? Confession is mandatory, usually once a year, but more often if you're especially riddled with guilt. You kneel behind a wooden screen, mutter your sins, and the priest, God's earthly ear, offers penance, prayers, perhaps fasting, or maybe an act of charity like feeding a beggar or repairing the church gate. The church controls more than just your soul. It owns land, sometimes more than the local lord. Monasteries are economic powerhouses, producing wine, cheese, manuscripts, even renting farmland. Cathedrals take centuries to build, requiring taxes, tithes, and donations from kings and commoners alike. You pay your tithe, 10% of your harvest or income. You give grain, eggs, chickens. Sometimes money, if you have any, which you usually don't. And still, more is asked. Building repairs. Candle funds. Contributions for a new reliquary to house what might be the toe of St. Simon. You're not sure it is a toe, but who are you to question relics? Because questioning is dangerous. Doubt is heresy. Heresy is death. Heretics are tried by inquisitors, men trained to ask the same question 20 different ways until you break. Trials are theatrical. Accusations are often vague, reading forbidden texts, denying a doctrine, consorting with suspicious persons. Confessions are extracted, often under torture. The condemned are burned at the stake, not just to punish, but to purify. You stand, recite the prayers you've memorized since childhood, and look at the crucifix behind the altar. Jesus hangs there, painted or carved, his expression either serene or agonized, depending on the artist. Blood flows from wounds in his hands, his feet, his side. He suffered, the priest says, so you can endure your own trials. Hunger, illness, hardship, these are your tests. Your soul, not your comfort, is the prize. Even your days are ordered by religion. You measure time not in minutes, but in bells. Morning prayers. Sext at noon. Vespers at dusk. Entire communities stop what they're doing to pray. Not participating is a social signal, and not a good one. The calendar, too, is religious. You mark time by feast days, St. Michael's Day, Candlemas, Ascension. The weeks leading to Easter, Lent, are for fasting and repentance. Advent prepares you for Christmas. Between those, there are saints to honor, virgins to venerate, and martyrs to emulate. And then there are pilgrimages. If you're especially devout, or especially desperate, you might travel hundreds of miles on foot to visit a holy site. Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, Rome, even Jerusalem. Pilgrimages promise spiritual merit, healing, even forgiveness of sins. You carry a staff, wear a scallop shell, and beg for alms along the way. Some make the journey to fulfill a vow. Others go in place of dead relatives. A few just seek adventure. But the road is long, treacherous, and filled with risks. Robbers, illness, exposure. And yet, they go. Because reaching the shrine, touching the relic, lighting a candle at the saint's tomb, it all offers hope. But not everyone can go. So many focus on local saints, patrons of their village or trade. Saint Isidore for farmers. Saint Elmo for sailors. Saint Apollonia if you've got a toothache. Their statues stand in corners, adorned with offerings, ribbons, bread, coins, even dolls. People pray to them directly, seeking intervention, miracles, protection. It's a strange mixture, orthodox doctrine wrapped in folk traditions. Priests allow it, mostly. The line between official faith and superstition is blurry, and the church understands that control often means compromise. In your home, you keep a simple cross carved from wood. Above the hearth, a faded image of the Virgin Mary. Before meals, you cross yourself. Before bed, you whisper prayers half memorized, half invented. Keep the fire lit. Keep the wolves away. Keep my child breathing. You're not sure if it works. But it can't hurt. Still, you have questions. Why do some starve while others feast? Why does the plague take the innocent and spare the wicked? Why does the priest have a better roof than your entire village? But you swallow those thoughts. You don't voice them. You just repeat the phrase everyone uses when faith starts to flicker. God wills it. Besides, even if you had doubts, what could you do? Books are rare. Literacy is rare. Bibles are handwritten, chained to church lecterns, and written in Latin. You can't read them. You listen to the priest. You trust what he says. Or you pretend to. And here's the truth, the one historians quietly debate: how much did people really believe? Did they internalize every teaching, or did they go through the motions out of fear and habit? Were they devout or dutiful? Was faith a flame or a fog? The records can't tell us. Only the prayers whispered in the dark, the desperate bargains made in fever dreams, and the candles lit with trembling hands can. But for now, you believe. You have to. Because in a world without medicine, science, or certainty, faith is your strongest shield. And it better be. Because there's a funeral today. The bell tolls again. One more soul. One more body in the earth. One more chance to remind the living that their time is coming too. You cross yourself. Whisper a prayer. And step out into the cold. The rooster doesn't even bother crowing this time. The sun is barely up, but your aching body already knows what's coming. You pull on your damp tunic and creak out the front door, nose wrinkling at the chill, and the scent of manure and damp wool that seems to settle into your very bones. Because today, like most days, it's all about the farm. Forget idyllic visions of pastoral serenity. This isn't the cheerful montage from a medieval-themed board game. Farming in the Middle Ages is backbreaking, monotonous, unforgiving, and absolutely essential to survival. And as a peasant, you're the bottom of a very tall ladder of people who benefit from your toil. Step 1? Survey the fields. They stretch out before you in long, uneven furrows, divided not by fences but by memory, handshakes, and the occasional wooden marker. You don't own the land. Most likely, it belongs to the local lord, the church, or some distant noble who has never so much as set foot in your village. What you have is usage rights. You're allowed to farm it. As long as you pay your dues. In crops, labor, or both. The land is part of an open field system. That means the arable land is divided into large fields, then subdivided into strips assigned to different families. Your strips aren't even next to each other, and they're often rotated with others to rest the soil. It's communal. It's traditional. It's wildly inefficient. But it's the system everyone understands, and no one dares to change it. Except for those rebels down south experimenting with enclosed fields and sheep pastures. Historians still argue whether that shift, centuries later, helped spur capitalism or just created a lot of angry, landless peasants. But for now, you've got your plot, and the frost still lingers on the edges. Today, you're turning the soil. You shoulder a wooden plowshare, crude, heavy, and far too short, and guide the oxen with loud clicks and the occasional jab from your gourd stick. The oxen are slow, stubborn, and prone to stopping mid-step just to glare at you. You sigh. You'll spend the entire morning shouting and sweating while the plow breaks the earth in ragged lines. You pass your neighbor, Thomas, who's already halfway through his strip and looks smug about it. His oxen are younger. His plow is better. You consider being bitter, but Thomas also has 6 children and a hernia. You call it even. Lunch is eaten where you stand. A chunk of yesterday's bread, a smear of soft cheese, a half-dried apple. You chew slowly, watching the crows circle. You chase them off with a yell. They come back. When harvest season hits, it's worse. Grain must be cut with sickles, curved blades that leave your hands blistered and your back in knots. Stalks are bundled, threshed with flails, and winnowed by hand to separate grain from chaff. It's slow, dusty work. You inhale so much husk, you'll be coughing for weeks. Still, it's critical. A bad harvest means hunger, debt, and sometimes death. In winter, you prepare the fields, mend tools, slaughter livestock. In spring, you sow. In summer, you weed. In fall, you reap. And every season, you pray, to Saint Isidore, to the Virgin Mary, to the weather gods you secretly still believe in, for sun, for rain, for not dying. But it's not all crops. You've got animals too. Chickens cluck around your feet, occasionally laying eggs where you can't find them. Pigs root through the compost pile and grunt at the door, demanding scraps. The cow, if you're lucky enough to have one, must be milked before dawn. It kicks. It farts. It stares into your soul. Sheep require shearing, which is an art form and a curse. Their wool is valuable, but they squirm like possessed cotton balls, and if you nick their skin, the cut might fester. Goats, meanwhile, are agents of chaos. They eat everything. They climb everything. You suspect they can read your thoughts. Manure is shoveled and spread on the fields. It steams in the cold air like a hot pie of humility. You carry it in woven baskets or drag it on a sled made of salvaged wood. You've long stopped gagging. This is the smell of work, and more importantly, of next season's food. Speaking of food, let's talk meals. You eat what you grow. Barley and rye for bread. Beans, onions, cabbage, leeks. Turnips when things get desperate. Meat? Rare. A chicken might be slaughtered for a wedding. A pig, maybe for Christmas. But usually, animals are too valuable alive, for eggs, milk, breeding. Your farm-to-table diet is local, organic, and seasonal, but not because you're trendy. It's because the nearest imported anything is 300 miles away, and you can't afford it anyway. Dairy plays a vital role. Milk turns to butter, which turns to buttermilk, which gets turned into flatbread or fed to pigs. Cheese, aged in damp cellars, provides protein during Lent when meat is forbidden. You store everything in cellars, barrels, or hanging nets. Preservation is a battle: salt, smoke, vinegar, and prayer. Drinks are either ale or cider, low in alcohol, brewed in massive vats over open fires. Everyone drinks it. Even the kids. Water is only drunk from trusted wells, if such a thing exists, and even then, it's often boiled. You learn to tell when your ale's gone off by smell alone. The line between sour and lethal is thinner than you'd like. And while we're here, let's address a fringe tidbit: eels. Yes, eels. In some parts of medieval England, eels are currency. You pay rent in them. Tithes in them. Eel pies are a delicacy, and fishing rights to eel-rich rivers are fiercely contested. There's even a 12th century record of someone paying for land with 26,000 eels. That's not dinner. That's an economy. So while you may not have coins in your pouch, you might be eel-rich. Slippery wealth, indeed. Back to work. Every few days, the reeve comes around to collect your dues for the local manor. He represents the Lord, sometimes a knight, sometimes a bishop, sometimes an absentee noble who couldn't point to your village on a map if his life depended on it. You owe part of your harvest, a chicken or two, maybe a day of labor on the Lord's private fields. And if you don't pay? Penalties range from fines to confiscation to being summoned to the manorial court, where you'll have to explain why your sheep went missing and why your wheat didn't meet the quota. Starvation is not a legal excuse. If you're behind on taxes, your ox might be seized. And if you are the ox owner in town? Expect half the village to come begging for help with plowing. The system is communal, but also cutthroat. The only upside to all this? Feast days. When they come, you get a break from the toil. Everyone gathers, under the church's eye, for bread, ale, and maybe a meat pie or roasted bird. There's music, dancing, games, and storytelling. You laugh with neighbors, share gossip, and for a moment, forget that your knees have been sore since last year. Then it's back to work. Farming isn't noble. It isn't beautiful. It's survival. Your hands are permanently calloused. Your skin is tanned unevenly. Your back aches constantly. You know every inch of your land, the dips, the stones, the patches where things never grow quite right. You speak to your animals. You name your tools. You mourn your crops when storms ruin them, and you rejoice when the barley grows straight and golden. And when you finally return home, smelling of soil and sweat, you sit near the hearth, close your eyes, and try not to think about how many more years your body can take this. Because the soil doesn't care about your comfort. The soil demands. And you obey. Nature calls, and in the Middle Ages, it doesn't call politely. There's no flush handle, no scented candles, no soft jazz playing in the background. When it's time to relieve yourself, the only music you'll hear is the splash of something unpleasant hitting something worse, and maybe the distant clucking of a chicken that got in where it shouldn't have. Let's be blunt, medieval bathroom culture is a nightmare. You shuffle toward the rear of your cottage, stomach groaning from last night's questionable stew, and brace yourself. There's no en-suite. There's no outhouse, either, not in the modern sense. What you have is a bucket. A chamber pot, if you're lucky. If not? Well, just pick a corner, hope the wind's blowing the other way, and try not to make eye contact with the goat. In peasant homes, the toilet is often a pot made of clay or tin. It lives under the bed or in a nook, and it's shared by the entire family. You do your business, cover it, if you're courteous, and empty it in the morning. Where? Into the street, naturally. Or the dung heap, or the open gutter running down the village lane. If that sounds horrific, congratulations, your instincts are intact. In towns and cities, it's worse. Chamber pots are emptied out of windows with a shout, "Garde-lou," if you're in Scotland, or something more guttural and alarming elsewhere. You learn quickly not to walk too close to walls or linger under balconies. That squelch beneath your foot? Best not investigate. Public latrines exist in some places, particularly in larger cities or monasteries, but they are primitive, smelly, and shared by dozens, if not hundreds. They're little more than wooden planks perched over cesspits, which are pits literally full of, well, everything. And when they fill up, enter the gong farmer. Yes, that's a real job title. Gong farmers are medieval sanitation workers. Their job is to dig out cesspits and carry the contents, called night soil, outside the city walls. They work at night, for obvious reasons, and are paid surprisingly well, given the constant stench and ever-present risk of disease. No one wants their job. Everyone needs it done. And don't get smug, nobles. You're not much better off. Castles may have privies, little stone rooms with a hole that leads to the outside, but those holes drop straight into a moat or a pit. Some have vertical shafts built into the walls, called guardrobes, that allow waste to fall outside. These often double as wardrobes, believe it or not. The ammonia from the waste is thought to deter moths, so people hang clothes near them. It works. Sort of. But the smell? Let's just say perfume was invented for a reason. Fancy castles might have a bench with a carved hole, even a bit of cloth to sit on. The shaft drops into a pit or the outer moat, great for disposing of waste, terrible if you ever need to clean the moat or host a summer garden party. Worse still, in winter, the draft from the chute turns your exposed rear into a shivering monument to bad architecture. One fringe historical tidbit? In some castles, gong channels were deliberately routed through the thick outer walls, so invaders couldn't sneak in that way. You'd think no one would try, but hey, desperate times. And very desperate smells. Now let's get even more personal, hygiene. Toilet paper? Nope. Not unless you're extremely rich and extremely innovative. Most people wipe with leaves, moss, straw, scraps of cloth, or, in cities, whatever's been discarded in the gutter and still looks vaguely absorbent. In some areas, smooth stones are reused, washed, we hope, and kept by the privy for the next person. It's as awful as it sounds. Washing hands after? If there's water. If you remember. Soap exists, but it's expensive and rough on the skin. Ashes and sand are often used instead. The idea of sanitation, washing to remove bacteria, is centuries away. You clean yourself to feel less gross, not to prevent illness. Now, bathing. Bathing does happen, contrary to the myth that medieval people never washed. But it's irregular, limited, and heavily dependent on your social status. If you're a peasant, you might bathe once a week. Or a month. Or just when the seasonal lice reach critical mass. You heat water over a fire, pour it into a wooden tub, and get in, if you have the luxury of enough water. The entire family might share the same bath water, from oldest to youngest. And if you're last in line, well, enjoy that onion-scented broth of sweat and soap scum. If you live near a river, you might bathe there instead. But beware, public nudity, even for hygiene, can get you fined, or worse, accused of indecency. Women usually bathe in shifts, shielded by reeds or fabric screens. Men are less discreet. In cities, bathhouses exist. Communal ones, like a medieval spa day, if your idea of a spa includes stew-like water and half the town. These are often operated by professionals who provide warm water, towels, and sometimes even a scrub or a massage. Some bathhouses double as brothels. Others are linked to monasteries and are strictly about cleansing the soul and the armpits. Monks, in fact, bathe more regularly than most laypeople. Cleanliness is part of their spiritual discipline. They often have structured bathing days, and monasteries usually include separate facilities for washing. Some even include heated water, a luxury peasants could only dream of while scraping mud off their knees with a broken shell. But for the average person, bathing is rare and deliberate. It takes effort, wood, time, and water. In winter, it's downright dangerous. Strip naked in a cold room, pour lukewarm water over yourself, and try not to freeze to death? Most would rather stay dirty and alive. Body odor, then, is a fact of life. You get used to it. Everyone stinks. So it's not considered impolite, it's just the background scent of society. To mitigate it, people use herbal sachets, oils, and perfumes. Lavender, rosemary, sage, and mint are common additions to clothing, worn in pouches or sewn into seams. Some wash their hands and face daily, especially before prayers or meals, but full body cleansing? Not unless absolutely necessary. Clothes don't help. You wear them until they reek. Washing them requires boiling water, which requires firewood, which is scarce and needed for food. Linen undergarments, if you have them, are easier to wash, and are the first line of defense against filth. Outer garments, wool tunics and cloaks, are brushed, beaten, or simply aired out. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Men might shave with knives or crude razors. Beards are often trimmed with shears. Hair is combed with bone or wooden combs and braided to avoid tangling. Women cover their hair after marriage, sometimes with veils, sometimes with wimples or linen coifs. Lice are given. Everyone has them. You pick them out, burn them, or pretend they're not there. Nitpicking is an actual job in some households. Teeth? They're cleaned with cloth, salt, ash, or herbal powders. Chewing parsley or mint helps with breath. There's no toothpaste, no floss, no dentists, just pain, abscesses, and eventual loss. And once your teeth start rotting, you hope the pain ends quickly. Or you visit the barber surgeon. You remember him. Now imagine being sick. You have diarrhea. You have no clean water. The pot is full. The wind is howling. And the fire is out. You drag yourself to the back of the hut and pray for speed. You wipe with whatever's nearby and go back to bed, dizzy, dirty, and probably not long for this world. It's no wonder, then, that so many medieval people equated cleanliness with holiness. Monks cleanse their bodies as part of their spiritual routine. Pilgrims bathe before visiting relics. The church sometimes encourages bathing, especially for priests, but also warns against vanity. Too much grooming? Sinful. Too little? Suspicious. And thus, you're always balancing between being pious and being pig-like. So as you crouch awkwardly over the privy hole, trying not to drop your tunic into the abyss, you realize something very important. You would not, in fact, survive medieval sanitation. And your modern plumbing? It's not a convenience. It's a miracle. The cold doesn't creep in, it crashes. It punches through the doorframe, oozes under the threshold, and clutches your toes before you're even fully awake. There's no gentle shift in seasons, no first pumpkin spice in the market to signal change. One day you're weeding the last of the onions. The next, the well's frozen over, and you're wondering whether your cow is shivering or dead. Winter has arrived in the Middle Ages. And you are not ready. You throw on every layer you own, which amounts to 3, a linen shift, a wool tunic, and a patched cloak that smells like fire smoke, mold, and and wet dog. Your boots, more like leather sacks with ambition, are stuffed with straw. The straw is supposed to act like insulation. It does. Barely. You step outside and your breath fogs instantly, a little ghost floating up to the slate-gray sky. The air is dead still. Silent. The kind of cold that doesn't just make you shiver, it makes your bones ache. And it's only going to get worse. In medieval times, winter isn't a postcard. It's a gauntlet. A cruel endurance test. And it starts not with snow, but with hunger. You don't farm in winter. There's no tilling, planting, or harvesting. What you do is survive, on whatever you manage to stash away during the fall. Your diet becomes even more limited. Bread. Gruel. The occasional dried apple or smoked meat if you were lucky, or clever enough to preserve it. Your cellar, if you have one, holds what you've salted, pickled, or buried in barrels of brine. Root vegetables, turnips, beets, onions, keep best. Beans and peas are dried and stored in clay jars. Cheese ages in the loft, harder each day. Butter's gone, milk is rare, and the hens have stopped laying. Even the mice have grown bolder, their little claws scratching at your stores like tiny thieves in the dark. You count every egg. Every loaf. Every bowl of pottage. Because the margin for error? It's razor thin. A single spoiled barrel can mean no food for the last 2 weeks of January. A rodent infestation can empty your grain bin. One bad windstorm could bring your thatch down and ruin everything inside. That's not just a setback. That's starvation. And when starvation sets in, it doesn't just hollow your belly, it hollows your soul. By January, your skin is sallow. Your hands are cracked. You wake up with lips so dry they bleed when you smile, if you smile. Children cry at night not from fear, but from hunger. Old people waste away in corners, wrapped in whatever cloth scraps the family can spare. You lose weight. You lose energy. You lose hope. People boil bark for broth. They bake cakes of acorn flour. They chew leather softened over fire. You hear of villagers trading moldy grain for candle stubs, just to warm their hands for a few minutes. And you start to understand why wolves appear in legends as more than just beasts. Because when food runs out, you become the prey. Wild animals grow bold. Foxes creep into henhouses. Crows tear into compost heaps. And wolves? They come out of the woods. Fringe reports from Eastern Europe describe wolves stalking travelers, circling sleds, picking off stragglers. Mothers whisper warnings into their children's ears, not about the forest witches, but about the gray ones. The quiet ones. The ones whose eyes glow in the snow. You double bar the door each night. Not because you expect an attack. But because you know winter breeds desperation, in everything. Fire is your only comfort. You burn peat if there's no wood, or dried cow dung if there's neither. The hearth smolders constantly, fed by scraps and luck. You sit as close as you dare, hands outstretched, face turned toward the coals, while smoke creeps up the chimney and paints your walls black. The fire is never enough. Your back stays cold. Your feet go numb. And if the wind shifts just wrong, the smoke blows back into the room, stinging your eyes, choking your breath. But you don't move. Because without that fire, the cold will kill you in your sleep. You sleep in clumps, parents, children, sometimes neighbors, all curled together like puppies in a box. The body heat helps. So do the fleas, oddly enough. They thrive in warmth, and their bites remind you that blood still moves in your veins. Your clothes? You don't change them. There's no point. You sleep in them, work in them, suffer in them. Washing is out of the question. Water is frozen. Firewood is scarce. So you wear your grime like a second skin, and try not to think about the smell. As for personal space? Forget it. The entire household shares one room. Chickens roost in the rafters. The goat sleeps under the bench. If you're lucky, your pig is still alive and fattening, though it eyes you as hungrily as you eye it. You named it in spring. You pretend you didn't. Soon, it'll be your only source of meat. Slaughter day is a grim celebration. The pig is killed with a swift knife, if you can manage it. Then the real work begins. Every part is used. Meat is salted or smoked. Fat is rendered. Skin becomes parchment. Blood is saved for sausage. Even the bladder becomes a toy for the children, a ghastly, bouncing bauble to distract them from the ache in their bellies. This is what abundance looks like in winter: a full smokehouse, a pot of stew, and warmth enough to thaw your fingers. And yet, even now, you're not safe. Because winter doesn't just freeze your crops and starve your gut. It isolates. Snow closes roads. Ice stops carts. The outside world shrinks to the four walls of your cottage and the stretch between your door and the woodpile. Visitors stop coming. Market stall. The village seems to fold in on itself. And isolation breeds fear. You start to notice your neighbor's cough more often. The way he rubs his chest. The way he's suddenly not at mass. You whisper about illness. You pray it's not catching. Because if one family falls sick, the others won't help, not because they are cruel, but because they are scared. Some winters, whole households vanish. Found months later, frozen under collapsed roofs. A curled-up dog. A broken chair. An uneaten bowl of stew still iced on the hearth. The priest says they've gone to a better place. You hope he's right. Even the strong go mad in winter. Long nights. Short days. The same meals. The same silence. You see shapes in the smoke. Hear footsteps where there are none. You dream of warmth so vivid that waking feels like dying. Some wander into the woods, convinced spring is just over the hill. Some don't return. In castles and keeps, things are slightly better, but only slightly. Stone walls are freezing. Fires help little. Tapestries hang thick, furs are piled deep, and servants constantly stoke the flames. But the chill seeps in, no matter how many velvet cloaks you wear. Pipes freeze. Mold creeps. Dishes arrive lukewarm. Rooms reek of damp wool, stale wine, and roasted meat half-turned. Even kings cannot command the weather. So how do people cope? Faith, mostly. Prayer. Routine. You mark days on the calendar, saints' feast days, Candlemas, Epiphany, each one a step towards spring. You listen for the first thaw. You wait for the first green sprig to poke through the snow. You prepare for Lent by eating the last of the salted meats, the butter, the cheese. Then you fast. Because when food runs out, fasting looks a lot like survival. And finally, after weeks of gray and months of suffering, you wake one morning to the sound of dripping. Real, steady dripping. Snowmelt slides from the thatch. The ground is soft underfoot. Mud, not frost. The air smells faintly of wet soil and hope. You step outside. You see a robin. You weep. You made it. But you'll never be the same. Because winter in the Middle Ages doesn't just take your strength. It takes a piece of you with it. The sun creeps higher, casting pale gold across frost-laced fields and shivering rooftops. You step outside, blinking into the light like someone who forgot what color was. The air is still cold, but it carries a new scent, moist earth, thawing manure, the faint green tinge of grass daring to return. Birds are singing again, timidly. The worst has passed. But don't relax yet. Because now comes the final, brutal reality check. Death is still the only true certainty in the Middle Ages. You made it through the mud, the hunger, the lawless nights, the lice, the cough, the unspeakable sanitation, but you are still not safe. Because death doesn't take days off. In fact, if anything, it seems more punctual here. For medieval people, death is a regular visitor. An expected one. A neighbor, even. It's discussed openly, depicted in art, woven into lullabies and sermons. Children learn the Lord's Prayer before they learn how to count, and it ends with a plea, "Deliver us from evil." And by evil, everyone means death. It's not dramatic. It's not even particularly tragic. It's just, everywhere. Infant mortality is appalling. Up to half of all children die before their 5th birthday. The causes? Everything. A fever. A fall. A bad harvest. A chill from sleeping too close to the door. One wrong breath in a room full of coughing. And because families need help on the farm, children start working early, often before their bones are fully formed or their immune systems even stand a chance. When a child dies, there's mourning, but it's a weary kind. The neighbors bring bread. A priest reads a brief mass. The body is wrapped in linen and buried quietly, often in the same plot as 4 or 5 little siblings. You plant herbs there, if you can, to keep away the dogs. Adults don't fare much better. Accidents are common. You trip with an axe. You fall into the well. You scratch your arm on a rusty nail and the wound turns black. There's no emergency room. There's no antibiotics. If you're lucky, someone gives you a warm broth and sings softly while your fever climbs. If you're unlucky, they just wait for you to stop thrashing. Work is dangerous. Disease is everywhere. And even pregnancy, an experience modern medicine now watches over with care and technology, is a roulette wheel of bleeding, infections, and prayers. Women die in childbirth all the time. And sometimes the baby dies too. And sometimes everyone lives, but no one thrives. Death doesn't knock. It lets itself in. Still, People prepare. You write your will, if you can write. More likely, you dictate it to a priest or a scribe. You confess your sins. You ask for last rites. You beg to be buried in consecrated ground. A good death, everyone agrees, is one that happens with a clean soul and a priest within arm's reach. Dying badly, that's the real fear. Dying with sin on your tongue, without confession, without penance, that's how you end up in purgatory, or worse. In flames, in darkness, weighed down by your unshriven soul. The church makes this part very clear. So you do what you can. You wear crosses. You donate to the poor. You light candles for Saint Joseph, patron of a happy death. You hang charms over your bed. You avoid graveyards at night. You keep your children away from crossroads and whisper blessings when someone sneezes. And when the bells toll, for a neighbor, a child, a lord, you pause and bow your head. Memento mori. Remember you must die. This mantra finds its way into every corner of medieval life. On church walls, you see frescoes of dancing skeletons leading kings, popes, and peasants alike to the grave. The dance of death, it's called. A reminder that none escape, not even those with silk on their backs or gold in their cups. Books are hand-copied with tiny skulls in the margins. Rosaries are strung with bone. Some lords keep human skulls in their chambers, not as morbid trophies but as reminders. This life is short. Eternity is long. But if death is certain, what comes after is negotiable. Heaven, hell, purgatory. A great cosmic scale. No one really knows, but everyone has theories. Priests say your soul is judged based on faith and deeds. Monks chant the hours to save their brothers. Peasants leave coins with the hope that someone will light candles on their behalf long after they are gone. It's a curious thing, for all its suffering, medieval life is drenched in hope. Hope that there's something better beyond the grave. Hope that pain is temporary. That justice exists in a more perfect place. That the cruel are punished. That the meek truly will inherit the earth. And this hope, tenuous, flickering, stubborn, makes the living bearable. Because you will die. But maybe that's not the end. Still, it's not just about you. Death affects the whole village. Funerals are communal. Neighbors dig the grave. Children carry candles. The priest leads a short procession. If the deceased was rich, there might be a feast, perhaps even hired mourners to wail and keen at the burial site. If poor, a wooden cross and a whispered prayer suffice. And what if someone dies badly? Unshriven? Mysteriously? That's when stories start. Maybe their ghost appears. Maybe someone sees a pale figure near the edge of the woods. Maybe a cow stops producing milk and people start muttering about curses. Death doesn't always stay where you put it. So villagers take precautions. They bury bodies with stones in their mouths to prevent them from speaking in death. They place scythes over coffins to keep spirits trapped. Some are buried face down, just in case they rise. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were. Some argue they were fringe superstitions. Others believe they were quietly normalized in rural areas. Either way, the fear is real. The boundaries between life and death are thinner than you'd think. And then, there are the plague pits. When the Black Death sweeps through, there's no time for ritual. Bodies pile up. Graves are dug hastily. Whole families vanish within days. The priest stops ringing the bell, he's dead too. Dogs scavenge the edges of town. People wear hoods soaked in vinegar and flee, but it's no use. Afterward, no one wants to talk about the pits. But they are there. Outside the walls. Covered with a thin layer of soil and decades of silence. Every spring, someone finds a bone. A skull. A broken rosary half buried in the mud. A reminder. Still, life goes on. Children laugh again. Songs are sung. The fields are tilled. New couples marry. Candles are lit. There's always another season. Always another chance to plant, to build, to hope. And that, perhaps, is the miracle. Not that they survived, but that they dared to live at all. In a world where death is constant, life becomes fierce. Every breath is defiant. Every meal shared is holy. Every child born is a victory against the odds. So, yes, you wouldn't last a day in the Middle Ages. But those who did? They were tougher than you. Hungrier. Dirtier. Wiser, in ways that had nothing to do with books. They knew things we've forgotten, how to make bread without yeast, how to mend boots with twine, how to pray when words fail. They made do with less, and they endured more. And when their time came, they walked toward death with heads high, hands calloused, and souls weighed down with neither riches nor regret. Because that's what the Middle Ages taught them. Live simply. Suffer boldly. Die well. And maybe, just maybe, be remembered. So here we are, night owls. We've walked barefoot through mud-soaked lanes, squinted through church incense, and stared into the flickering shadows of a time so foreign, yet still etched deep in our collective roots. Maybe you started this journey thinking the Middle Ages were a dusty backdrop to fairy tales. Now, perhaps, you see the truth. It was a place of grit and grief, faith and fire, filth and flickers of beauty, moments of stillness between the chaos. Close your eyes now. Picture thatched roofs glistening with frost. Imagine the rhythmic sound of the loom, the clang of a distant forge, the murmur of prayers in candlelight. Hear the crackle of a hearth struggling against the cold, the quiet breath of someone sleeping beside you, alive another day. The people you met, peasants, priests, blacksmiths, barbers, midwives, even the poor gong farmer, were all just doing their best. Like us, they loved and feared, stumbled and endured. They held on to hope when they had nothing else to hold. Maybe you wouldn't have lasted a day in their world. But they did. And for that, they deserve to be remembered. Now, take one last breath in. Let it go, slow and soft. You're safe here. Warm. Clean. Federal lucky. Dim the lights a little lower. Let the silence settle. Tomorrow is another world away.